This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Sunday. Welcome to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, a weekly, proudly progressive talk show where we remind you that liberal is not a bad word. As usual, every Sunday, we like to tell you about the news that you may have missed during the week. Good morning, Shano.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm sleepy, as usual, but doing great. Thanks for asking.
Just think, just an hour from now, you'll be like bouncing off the walls.
Oh, yes. A few more cups of coffee.
There you go.
Yes. To start our news off today, of course, we had to mention Florida, since we used to live there. The big news in Florida this week, well, the big, somewhat interesting news, is that the Everglades python hunt has officially drawn hundreds of people to the state of Florida to hunt wild Burmese pythons. Shane over there playing with his phone, distracting me. More than 700 people from 32 states and Canada have traveled to Florida to hunt wild Burmese pythons that have invaded the Everglades. Many people have probably heard about this story, but the new hunt kicked off in Fort Lauderdale this Saturday, and hundreds of people who have never hunted or even handled a snake, let alone a wild Burmese python, are registered for this attack. It is a particularly invasive species because it has no known predators. It eats endangered and threatened species and competes with the native animals for habitat and food. These snakes can grow up to 25 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds. Not the type of snake that somebody needs to be handling if they've never handled reptiles. I think we may hear some interesting news about this later in the week. What do you think, Shane?
I've heard a little bit about it. Yeah, pythons running around. Why don't we just stick the gators on them?
They actually are large enough they eat small gators.
Wow.
Yes.
So they really have no... Well, let's get some big gators.
Well, the big gators probably aren't too threatened by them, but it takes, it takes a very long time for an alligator to get that large.
Yeah.
So, just...
How they get... just people dropped them off or something? Is that how they got there?
They do believe that the problem was started by
Just
humans, people releasing pets or possibly pets escaping.
Mm-hmm.
The snakes have been completely invasive, have been already found all the way up in northern Florida and are expected to make their way all the way up to the Carolinas, if not gotten under control.
We better draw the line at the Mason-Dixon again.
Yes. The snakes were first recorded in South Florida in the 1980s, and they've since spread through the Everglades quite easily and are expanding their range northward. They are very, very powerful snakes, and Cheryl Millett, who's with the Nature Conservatory, said people should not underestimate them, that her biggest concern is that people are safe and that they're, humanely hunting these pythons. It's illegal to carry a Burmese python in the state alive. So they have to kill these snakes in the Everglades. And, it is a shame that any animal has to be killed. Where do you draw the line? Whether or not you leave them to, take over the habitat of the natural.
I say we call Samuel Jackson.
Why is that?
He'll take care of it. You got him off the plane, didn't he?
Oh, yes. These M&F snakes in these M&F and Everglades.
Off my airboat.
Yes. Yes. And some teachers in Seattle this week are making news by refusing to give the standardized testing that have plagued, so many states and so many schools. 2 Seattle high schools now, nearly all of the teachers have signed onto a petition and refused, completely boycotted the Measures of Academic Progress test, known as the MAP test there. According to the teachers, they say it is a flawed test that students don't take seriously, and it's only being used to evaluate teachers. The boycott is the first school-wide effort in the country in about a decade, and it's part of a growing grassroots revolt against the excessive use of standardized testing to evaluate teachers, students, schools, and districts. Even the parents in these districts have started opting out of allowing their children to take these exams. School boards have approved resolutions calling for the end of these tests. Thousands of people have signed a national resolution protesting these high test stakes, and even superintendents and teachers have spoken out against them in various states. But these Seattle teachers have, in addition to fully boycotting this test, have started a whitehouse.gov petition, change.org petition, saying that we have all, quote, "we have all come to the conclusion that we cannot in good conscience subject our students to this test again." They have been notified by the Seattle Public School District that the test is not valid at the high school level. The teachers are not even allowed to see the contents of the test. And this test is actually, where's the part of it here? This test is actually a remnant of Dr. Goodloe Johnson, who Maria Goodloe Johnson was a superintendent. She was a board member of the Northwest Evaluation Association. So here she was, a superintendent of the schools. She was also a board member of the company that sold the test.
So she pushed on the school district and then profited personally. So that could be the motivation rather than having a good testing system that would help
Correct.
educators and educatees.
Correct. Because of the scandal, Dr. Goodloe Johnson was fired, but somehow the MAP test survived the house cleaning. Essentially, lots of people have evaluated this specific test in the educational community.
They've tested the test?
They've tested the test. And basically say that even NEWA, the very company this woman worked for, objected to being evaluated by a test whose author suggests extreme caution in its use and warns against valid legal action if the test is used in personnel decisions. The actual company that created the test advised districts to carefully restrict its use, said that it should have only been used for a random selection of students, and that problems become particularly profound at the high school level. That's the actual company that creates the test.
Why did they create the test then? I don't understand this. And don't they need to update the tests?
I'm betting there was some money involved in that.
It makes no sense to me, any of this.
No, and that's why the teachers are saying they refuse to.
It looks like they're, based on what you've told me, it looks like they're on the correct side. Everyone and everybody involved is against the test, so the test will go.
Hopefully so. Hopefully so. But good on these Seattle teachers. I would love to see more teachers and parents and school boards around the country stand up for the rights of the students and not allow them to continue to be evaluated unfairly by these standardized testing. You know, they're all left in place from the No Child Left Behind Act, and they've been proven time and time again to be unsuccessful. It's time to get them out of our schools. In Louisiana news, good old Bobby Jindal.
Oh, dear.
Yes. He has come out stating he wants to eliminate both his state's income tax and corporate income tax. You like that?
Sure.
He wants to.
There's plenty of states that don't have them.
Right. But he wants to do so.
How? Yeah. Where's
in
he
a
get the revenue?
quote unquote, revenue neutral manner by increasing the state's sales tax.
So he's more for the regressive taxes.
Exactly. He wants to eliminate the income and corporate tax and pay for those tax cuts with state sales tax. He says he would plan to make the matter revenue neutral, and that the goal would be to keep the sales tax as low and flat as possible. But it could require the state sales tax, going from 4% to 7%. So that's quite a large increase to people on a low income.
And I'm sure he has some kind of exemption up to a certain amount for lower income people. Is that in there?
Nope.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So it's going to fall mostly on consumers, people who spend 100% of their money
exactly
on food. Well, actually, is food exempted? Do we know in Louisiana? A lot of states food.
I
is
don't
exempted,
know,
but I'm sure gasoline will be through the roof. Fuel,
right?
Clothing,
right. And this is Louisiana's tax system is already tilted towards the rich, with the richest 1% in the state having a tax rate that's roughly half the rate paid by the poorest 15%. So it's already regressive. And that's according to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, that the actual percentage rate they pay of their income is far less than the lowest 15%.
And then when on top of this, then when they inevitably run those budget deficits, right?
Right.
A year later, then what they'll do is it's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. Then they cut services even more, and then you have your spiral into the,
Exactly. And, cuts always happen to come from education, police unions, teachers, firefighters. And
why don't they
those who
just
can
disband the entire state? Screw it. Who needs them?
Yeah. The Brookings Institution's William Gale says almost any revenue neutral shift from the income tax to a consumption tax will be regressive. That, because low and middle income earners tend to spend all of the money they make, they're being hit with that tax on all of their income, while the richest in the state can easily afford to save and thus not pay sales taxes on that portion of their income.
And federally, they're going to get the benefit of the of carried interest still, and they're still going to get the benefit of capital gains rates. And
right.
Wow.
So just make it even worse. That's what they call, widening the base. I love that phrase.
Yeah, and that's what they'd love to do federally.
Exactly. This is exactly what they would like to do.
They'll never say we're going to tax lower income people more. They'll call it broadening the tax base.
Right. Which means making people who don't pay taxes because they make such a small amount of money that they're exempt from them now pay taxes. Good job, Republicans. And in other tax dodging news, yes, Shell's drilling rig that recently ran aground in Alaska, causing the rig and 150,000 gallons of fuel and drilling fluid to wash up on an island along the Alaska coastline. Well, new report from Think Progress says that mishap, as Shell has termed it, may have occurred simply because they were trying to dodge taxes.
Please, that doesn't make any sense to me. Go ahead, explain this one. Is it where they were docking, where they're trying to travel to avoid some kind of state line, or what?
Yes. Chapter 43.56 of Alaska statutes states that an annual 2% tax can be imposed assessed each year, on, quote, the full and true value of taxable oil and gas property taxable under this chapter. So as of January 1st, Shell would have potentially been exposed to a tax liability of about $6 million, being that they had reportedly spent about $292 million on this drilling expedition. They attempted to move this New Year's Eve into international waters.
Wow.
Yes.
They had to move it 3 miles out or whatever.
They had to move it out of Alaska's coastline on New Year's Eve in order to avoid the taxes. Now, of course, Shell's official response is that they were only doing this because there was a 2-week window of good weather, which very well could be true, but it just so happened to coincide with when they would have been.
Was the 14th day of that 2-week window the New Year's Eve?
Yeah.
It just sounds like a bunch of bull.
Yeah, and I wonder now how much more money they'll be spending in addition to that tax revenue. $6 million, which is like a drop in the oil bucket for Shell. That's nothing. I wonder how much more they're going to be hit with fines and cleanup costs.
Given the record in terms of percentage of damage versus percentage of fines, not a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah, but
it's kind of like speeding to get to work on time and then getting pulled over.
Yes.
You end up there even later.
And you get the cost of a ticket.
Yeah. Well,
it is somewhat speculation. We don't know that they, in fact, were moving it to avoid the tax revenue, but it's an awfully interesting coincidence, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. Well, Shane, you pointed this story out to me, and some just, if you're going to be dumb, you better be tough kind of a story. A Texas man is now facing third-degree felony charges of making a terrorist threat after he allegedly told an elementary school staff that he had brought a gun into the building. He, in fact, had no gun. Yes, Ronald Miller was unarmed Wednesday when he told a school greeter at Salina Elementary School.
School greeter?
School greeter.
Is that where all the Walmart greeters went?
I think that's pre-Walmart. Like if you're not old enough to get the Walmart greeter job, you can work as a school greeter.
Work your way up in the ranks.
Exactly. Ronald Miller told the school greeter that he had a gun.
I thought they were called receptionists, but okay.
The greeter froze, and Miller was able to walk into the school and enter the office. Miller reportedly revealed his stunt was just a test of school safety, and he then wanted to speak with the principal. The school did not call the police immediately, but waited until he had left, and he was arrested Wednesday evening and is still being held with a $75,000 bail. Some of the parents at the school were concerned about the incident, saying that it showed the school was not prepared to deal with an armed assailant. Granted, this is an elementary school.
Just wondering, was O'Keefe filming this?
That's a really good question.
It just sounds like one of those stunts.
Yes.
But this is not, this is not funny. I mean, think about being that receptionist, that greeter, that terror.
Yes.
And that is a terrorist threat.
And he apparently went into the administration office at the school and, did the bang, you're dead, bang, you're dead, bang, you're dead, in emphasis that if he had had a gun, that essentially he could have shot and killed many people. So essentially terrorizing them because he was able to pull off this stunt. Some parents at the school were very upset, saying the school is not prepared and that they need to be more vigilant about, armed assailants. Other parents said, this is ridiculous. The school is safe and you can't live in fear all the time. It's just quite interesting. And I wonder if Mr. Miller is enjoying his stay in jail. So just good for him that he wasn't doing it in Arizona with Joe Arpaio's armed volunteer posse. And he could have ended up dead.
He could have. Very well.
Exactly. So we have lots more in store for this show. Mitch Malasky, host of the DC Sports Beat on We Act Radio, is going to share some sports news, something we don't often cover here with us, and lots of good stuff and good news about next week's show we're very excited about. So this is Talking Left. You're listening live on We Act Radio, SoFlo Radio, RadioOrNot.com, or, of course, TalkingLeft.com. And we'll be right back. Stick around.
I've seen the show. It's excellent.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Okay, astronaut, you're up. You'll be meeting with Wish Kid Brandon.
Roger, Brandon.
His wish is to see a space shuttle launch.
All systems are go. We are clear for liftoff.
This year, more than 27,000 children will be diagnosed with a life-threatening medical condition.
And, Cowboy,
Yes, ma'am.
you'll be meeting with Shayla at a dude ranch in San Antonio.
Let's saddle up.
Some will miss school, some will miss time with their family and friends.
Princess, are you here?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for rescuing me from that evil witch.
Juliana wishes for a princess-themed room makeover.
That sounds magical.
But with your help, the Make-A-Wish Foundation can lift their spirits and give them a special kind of hope.
Pirate,
Yar.
you're up for Isaac's wish.
Aye, aye, Captain.
The wishes of thousands of children are waiting to come true.
You can help make my wish happen. Visit wish.org today.
My name is Joe Thompson. I'm 29 years old and have a career that I love as a systems analyst. Career. It still sounds cool to say that word. I never could have gotten on this path without a college degree. And if the college me were here, he'd tell you.
I never would have gotten to college without Big Brothers Big Sisters. I could have ended up anywhere, on the streets even. But college? Joe Thompson? Not likely. My big brother helped me out. He taught me I could do anything, at a time when a lot of people were saying just the opposite.
And to a 7-year-old, that means a lot. My big brother's name is Phil. And Phil is the reason that this 7-year-old grows up to be a systems analyst.
Whether you donate money or time, you're helping Big Brothers Big Sisters help a child. And that can last a lifetime. Start something today at bigbrothersbigsisters.org. Brought to you by Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Brad Friedman, your friendly citizen investigative blogger, journalist, troublemaker, muckraker, and all-around swell fellow from bradblog.com. Join me for the Bradcast every Wednesday from 3 to 4 p.m. 1 hour of troublemaking and muckraking ripped from the pages of bradblog.com and sometimes from the dark recesses of my mind. We'll have investigative interviews with newsmakers, we'll call out the liars, frauds, and phonies, and we'll even give kudos to the good guys if we can find any. Stories you won't hear anywhere else. We'll report on politics, elections, election reform, mainstream corporate media failure, media reform, global warming denialism, and everything before, during, and after. Join me for the Bradcast every Wednesday, now a full hour, 3 to 4 p.m., right here on Pacifica Radio's KPFK and coast to coast and around the globe on kpfk.org.
Hank Action News is proud to be sponsored by Healthcare for America Now. HCAN is a national coalition of more than 1,000 groups in 50 states, representing 30 million people. HCAN works to promote, defend, implement, and improve the Affordable Care Act at both the state and federal levels. They also try to protect Medicare and Medicaid, increase corporate accountability, and confront forces that seek to take away critical services. HCAN believes in creating jobs, not cutting programs people depend on. HCAN runs comprehensive issue campaigns that mobilize people at the grassroots and define the public debate. HCAN is fighting to protect, implement, and improve the new health care law through national and state-based legislative and regulatory campaigns built on grassroots action, public education, communications, policy analysis, and groundbreaking research. HCAN has become a respected voice and national leader on health care while continuing to focus on aggressive field activity. Support HCAN, Healthcare for America Now.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We are very excited to be here this morning live on We Act Radio, SoFlo Radio, RadioOrNot.com, or maybe you're checking out the podcast over at TalkingLeft.com.
In which case, we are excited to be there whatever time of day it is right now.
Exactly.
Right now, look at your watch. That is the time we're excited to be here.
The last story we just did in the news, of course, Joe Arpaio. A lot of news has been made this week about parents and even non-parents concerned that his posse of 3,000 members, many of which are armed and some of which apparently have criminal pasts, will be parading and patrolling around schools in Arizona. Well, that's officially set to begin on Monday and will be fully ramped up, as they say, by Wednesday. He's stating that his posse, which I think is just a ridiculous name. I'm sorry. Are we in the wild, wild west?
That's what he's trying to harken back to, the white hats, the black hats, the whole spiel.
Yeah. He's stating that they're very well trained with over 100 hours on how to use the weapons, and they have authority under the elected sheriff. Now, my concern here is that somebody, be it a parent or student or somebody who just happens to be walking by, is going to end up shot and killed despite the fact that they're innocent.
Like some guy coming in and claiming he has a gun to a school greeter?
Yes, exactly. Like somebody like that, who, granted, pulled a stupid stunt and should be, held accountable for putting the teachers and staff in fear for their lives. Well, Ohio, specifically the Montpelier Exempted Village Schools Board of Education in Ohio, that is a mouthful, has unanimously voted to arm the school janitors.
How do the school janitors feel about this, and how do the parents of the students feel about this?
Well, the article didn't go on to say, because this is just now making news, but Superintendent Jamie Greer claims that having guns in the hands of the right people are not a hindrance. They are a means to protect. This isn't even the first time that janitors have been called to be armed, as Charlotte Allen's, lamented in her very sexist column recently after.
I do remember that.
After the Newtown shooting, that, quote, there didn't even seem to be a male janitor to heave his bucket at Adam Lanza's knees, which, first of all, was not factually accurate. There was a male janitor that probably saved lives by running around and warning people
and
of
locking
the events
doors.
Taking place.
Locking the doors from the outside so that the gunner couldn't get into certain classrooms.
Yes, but the main story here is that these teachers, these janitors, these school boards, and Sheriff Arpaio, unsurprising there, are totally buying into the NRA's argument that, to quote the NRA's infamous claim, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And instead of there being a meaningful discussion about guns, or even a meaningful discussion about whether or not we want more guns in our schools, they're just going ahead with the process without the consent or the voting by parents.
But what has the NRA done? I think we touched on this last week. What have they done by people are going to get either upset or rah-rah about this, and then there's going to be a debate about whether or not teachers and janitors should be armed, whether or not a discussion about whether or not there should be reasonable gun restrictions and gun controls. So we're not talking now. The discussion before was, how do we regulate guns? Now it's, how many guns should we have out there?
Right.
Should we have more or just the same?
Well, apparently, and we're going to get into this in just a few minutes, this is something that the NRA has been doing since the 1980s. And they did something a little different before. They did. For all of those people who think the NRA has always been this staunch gun support organization, we have some interesting news to share. And that's coming up next. You're listening to us live on Talking Left, and we're going to get into that right when we come back. Don't go anywhere.
What kind of a crazy world is this?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Finally, in the 11th hour and 59th minute, Republicans and Democrats negotiated a fiscal reform package, which they touted as the American Taxpayer Relief Act. But if you had been allowed to peek behind the curtain during the deal-making, you would have noticed that the Dems and Repubs were not alone, and some taxpayers were getting extra special relief. Captain Morgan, Bacardi, and other Caribbean rum peddlers, for example, were at the table, picking up a $500 million a year liquor subsidy. NASCAR wheeled in to win a multi-million-dollar loophole for building racetracks. Railroad conglomerates hauled off a $165 million bundle for maintaining their own tracks. Disney and other fabulously wealthy Hollywood studios reeled in a $75 million subsidy for making movies. And Big Coal mined the negotiation for a federal giveaway to buy safety equipment and provide safety training for their workers. But the big dogs in the room, as usual, were Wall Street hucksters. Tucked inside the reform bill is Section 322, opaquely titled Extension of Subpart F Exception for Active Financing Income. In plain English, that line of gobbledygook will move $9 billion this year from our public treasury into the already overflowing coffers of Bank of America, Citigroup, J.P. Morgan Chase, and other fiefdoms of high finance. Worse than the giveaway, however, is the provision's purpose. As explained by the excellent watchdog group Citizens for Tax Justice, Section 322 essentially underwrites the financing of corporate offshoring, a $9 billion subsidy for moving more U.S. jobs to foreign countries. This is Jim Hightower saying, Italians have a useful phrase that applies here. Cui bono? Who benefits? Yes, this Republican-Democrat compromise has some good provisions, but deep inside, it's the same old corporate ugliness.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, the Workers' Independent News Service. I'm Jesse Russell. It was the Saturday between Christmas and New Year's, and a far-flung group of volunteers with Occupy Sandy had come together at St. John's Episcopal Church in the Bay Ridge section of Brooklyn to cook meals for hurricane victims. Half a dozen of the volunteers were young people in a Green Jobs training and college prep program who came in on their week off to help. WIN's Melinda Tuhus has more.
Green City Force is part of AmeriCorps. To be eligible, young people must be between 18 and 24 years old, live in public housing, and have a high school diploma or a GED. Sindra Davis lives in Red Hook, Brooklyn, which was devastated by Hurricane Sandy. She's college-bound, but is getting her green education on a city farm.
I work in the Red Hook Community Farm, learning how to maintain a farm and what it takes to maintain a farm, because we are also building a farm in the Red Hook development.
The farm has a sophisticated food composting operation, which Davis described in detail. Coincidentally, the garbage bags full of food scraps generated by the Occupy Sandy Bay Ridge Kitchen go to the farm for processing into what organic farmers call black gold, rich humusy earth that vegetables thrive in.
Also, if you want to get somebody started on chopping some celery.
Davis says there's another connection between Green City Force participants and Occupy Sandy Relief that explains why these young adults are spending their Saturday chopping squash, potatoes, and celery that will be turned into delicious hot meals to be delivered to families who are still unable to cook their own food.
Mainly, a lot of people in the program have been affected by the hurricane, and I also live in an area that was really affected by the hurricane, so we're just offering helping services to people and just helping out when we could.
She says her family had to evacuate for 2 weeks, and things are still far from normal, although there is intermittent power.
And sometimes there'll be hot water, and then sometimes there'll be cold water, sometimes there'll be no water, no heat.
Different volunteers take turns heading up the cooking and dispatching the food from the Bay Ridge Kitchen, as many as 2,000 meals a day. On Saturday, it was Jamie Kemmerer and his wife, Alicia, who have spent almost every Saturday for the past 2 months cooking for hurricane survivors.
Some of them have electricity, some of them don't, some of them have gas, some of them don't. Literally, we've been providing food to some of these same families since the storm. So if we were to just quit, who would be providing for those families? So I feel like until we know that those families are on their own feet or able to cook or, have some source of food, we have to keep doing it. We just have to.
This report has been made possible in part by a grant from the Burger Marx Foundation.
You've been listening to WIN, the Workers' Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. I feel like I'm choking. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
You know how to react to their asthma attacks. Here's how to prevent them. Call 1-866-NO-ATTACKS. Visit www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Nowadays, many people hear the NRA and think of staunch Second Amendment supporters, sometimes even insurrectionists that, believe guns are there to protect us from the government. But the NRA actually wasn't always this way. Despite the fact that today the NRA takes hardline positions even on the mildest forms of gun control, it wasn't always the case. Throughout its history, the NRA supported gun control, including restrictions on gun ownership, and they were not always focused on the Second Amendment. The organization actually had a change of heart only when the Black Panthers in the 1970s, and this was a much different Black Panthers than we see today.
Now it's the new Black Panther Party.
Right.
We're talking about the one that was, begun in California,
the
Huey Newton.
Militant type.
Well, that were trying to protect the African-American population from police brutality.
Yes.
That's why they were formed.
Yes. The NRA changed its stance when the Black Panthers were actually advocating for the individual right to bear arms.
What is different about that situation than today?
Right. We'll let you fill in the blank there. But while...
what's different?
Gun control itself is as old as our country, as old as the founding, but it was never interpreted as an absolute in the early days of the United States. There was always this balance between individual rights and the safety of others.
Which is the same for every one of our rights, whether it's enshrined in the Bill of Rights or anywhere else.
Right. Even contrary to popular legend, popular belief, the Wild Wild West, as we know it, even had a balance of gun control. The NRA even pushed for gun control measures back, say, in the 1934, 1960s, and on. In 1934, the nation's first Federal Gun Control Act, which was the National Firearms Act, was openly supported by the NRA. And that...
what?
Yes.
What?
That included restrictive gun control measures and drafted legislation in numerous states limiting the carry of concealed weapons.
Now, what year did you say this was?
This is 1934.
Now, this is the same one that got rid of the Tommy gun, things like that, machine guns.
Right. This was specifically in response to Prohibition-era organized crime. In other words, the
Al Capones.
The Al Capones.
This is Elliot Ness, the whole...
At that time, NRA President Carl Frederick even said, quote, "He did not believe in the general promiscuous toting of guns. I think it should be sharply restricted and only under licenses." That Uniform Firearms Act was a model law, and it required people to have a police permit in order to carry a concealed weapon, required a registry of all gun purchases, and a 2-day waiting period for firearm sales.
How enlightened of them.
Sounds a lot like what we have today, which is interesting because that means the gun laws...
What we're discussing today.
Yes, but the gun laws have not become any safer for us unarmed civilians since 1934.
No.
Yes.
In fact, they've been chipping away at some of those restrictions.
Yes.
Either through technology or through legislation.
Yeah. But it wasn't always the case. In the 1960s, the organization even lobbied for more gun control, including the Gun Control Act of 1968, which banned gun sales by mail, enacted a system of licensing those people and companies who bought and sold firearms. So essentially, the gun dealers made the gun dealers become licensed. And even California Governor Ronald Reagan supported the gun control measure. He called it a means of restoring social order. Now, that code phrase was specific in response to the Black Panther Party, because beginning in 1966, the Panthers carried out their own what they called police patrols, in which they would rush to the scene of an active arrest with loaded weapons publicly displayed and would notify those being arrested of their constitutional rights. Well, in May 2nd, 1967, while while the California state legislature was trying to repeal an open carry law, not allowing their citizens to carry loaded guns in public, what a drastic measure. The Black Panthers actually protested the bill by walking into the California State Capitol building fully armed. And in response, the state passed what is known as the Mulford Act by California state legislator at the time, Don Mulford. He introduced the bill saying it would now be illegal to carry loaded weapons openly in public. Now, granted, at that time, Governor Reagan supported the bill and even signed it into law. But in the 1970s is when we start to see a change. That's when
Lots
the
of stuff
NRA,
changed for the 70s.
yes, that's when the NRA became the NRA we know today. The gun-loving, gun-nut-embracing organization that today says the only way to prevent gun violence is to get more guns. That all started because of their lobbyist in the 70s, Harlan Carter. He was a former budget control agent and a staunch supporter of Second Amendment gun rights, as he took the interpretation. He, Carter, and a faction that aligned with him actually staged a coup in the NRA in 1977. And they lobbied against the establishment that wanted to shift away from gun control and crime in favor of conservation and sportsman issues. And by conservation, they mean conservation of their Second Amendment rights as they read them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. This new hardline NRA feared the government would simply take away their guns, and that's when the organization began doing everything in their power, including starting to buy politicians, to ensure that never happened. This also happened to coincide with the Black Panther Party and other left-wing gun control foes somewhat now out of the picture.
And disarming.
Yes.
And disbanding.
Yes. Ironically, Ronald Reagan himself, who had signed the Mulford Act in order to disarm the Black Panther Party, suddenly changed his stance and advocated for guns as a defense against state power. I think it's very ironic the governor is saying guns are needed as a defense against state power.
Well, when they say state, they mean state as in the nation state.
Right.
Not your local state. It gets very confusing.
Yes.
But they mean the nation state, meaning federal government.
Right. But by 1980, the NRA endorsed its first candidate for president ever. Who was it? Ronald Reagan.
There you go again.
Yes. So you see, the NRA actually used to support this legislation. They actually used to advocate. And
to clarify, we're talking about the leadership of the NRA. NRA members.
Yes, absolutely.
Overwhelmingly are for reasonable, restrictions, guidelines, safety measures, etc., as they are polled. It's one of those things where the leadership really doesn't represent the members. It represents the people who pay the bills and who are essentially the gun manufacturers.
Right. Well, that pretty much coincided with all these idea changes. This is also when, as we're going to get into in the beginning of the next hour, when the NRA started commissioning its own reports, studies, articles, books, meetings, conferences, and more, even law review articles to support its cause, to support their view of the Second Amendment, to change from that historically known, let's see if I have the article.
It's the idea of the collective. Gun ownership used to be seen as the collective because the Second Amendment starts a well-regulated militia being necessary.
Right.
And so the idea of gun ownership was of a group could own guns, but especially during the 90s, post-Brady Bill, they worked really hard, and I think we're talking about this now. Or
yeah. We're going to talk about it at the beginning of next hour.
Okay.
But no, you can elaborate.
Essentially wanted to change the intelligentsia or the perception of the intelligentsia's reading of the Second Amendment to be more towards an individual right. And the way you do that is through law review articles, so then you can go in front of the Supreme Court and say, look at all these law review articles, all these scholars, not that they weren't bought and paid for, all the think tanks. And, it's the same thing Glenn Greenwald talks about in Koch brothers Exposed. You go find intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals, people with letters after the name who are willing to be
bought and paid for.
So they write articles, lots and lots of articles and books, and put lots of footnotes in them that don't mean a darn thing and aren't actually what they're citing, just to propel your point of view. Then you go in front of the Supreme Court and say, see, look at all these articles. These scholars have said this. Well, you bought these.
Right. And
then you have less than intelligent. Okay. People on the Supreme Court who want to buy into that theory and just need a couple pieces of paper to justify it, and therefore they can extend the Second Amendment however they want because, see, we have all these papers.
Well, this is also when the NRA started using fear. Well, the NRA specifically.
Yeah, fear is always nearly always the motivator in any political discussion. Right. And we'll get into that as well in what the real Second Amendment was about.
Yes, and
it is
parties that started using fear to protect it. But it's so much deeper than most people realize. There's so much more to this story than simply the advocates of the Second Amendment as we now know them. And, the NRA themselves promoted and spread this government is going to come and take our guns nonsense so that they could generate more sales for the gun dealers and manufacturers that they work for.
Yeah. And the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun who bought it from our clients.
Yes. Although that was completely disproven in California this week.
Also, there's a predicate to the entire argument that the bad guy has a gun.
That's a great point.
Why does the bad guy have? Why don't we ask the question? Why does the bad guy have the gun, and how did he get it, and how can we prevent bad guys from getting guns?
Right.
That's the argument most people are having. NRA doesn't want that argument.
Right, but even that argument was disproven this week in California.
It's impossible. You can't do it.
When an unarmed teacher and principal talked a student who had just shot two people, thankfully not shot and killed, talked him out of out of a gun when they were unarmed. It just goes to show you that their statement, good guy, bad guy, gun,
I don't think that
doofus conclusion.
Every situation is going to be different. The one thing that you can take out of all these, if you take the guns out, you don't have people shot.
Exactly.
So that's the goal, I think.
Well, we're going to get into this and more. This will not be a whole show about gun control or gun issues, but we had some interesting stuff that people may not have heard, and we wanted to share it with you. So don't go anywhere. This is Talking Left, and we're going to be right back with more here on We Act Radio, SoFlo Radio, Progressive Blend Radio, or of course our home sweet home, TalkingLeft.com. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Hal Sparks from the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, and this is Talking Left.
We got no plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Fighter like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending. We got no plans.
A while back on a Moment of Clarity episode, I asked people when exactly they realized what really matters in life, what qualifies as the meat of existence. When was the moment they understood it was borderline insane to devote themselves to inane treasures like clothing and cars and ridiculous shows of borrowed wealth, like spending $7 grand on wedding flower arrangements? Is that what those flowers are worth to you? A month of work if you can afford them and a year of debt if you can't? If they're worth that much, then why not give a about the forest where they grow? They're right there. They're right there. But no, we can't protect the forest because we need virgin growth wood pulp to make our toilet paper soft enough for our pristine asses. I can't just be wiping my ass with anything. This thing is a work of art, a rather large work of art. Would you wax a Lamborghini with sandpaper just because it happens to be the size of 6 Lamborghinis? And almost every single person said they realized what really mattered in life after nearly losing their life. I've had a few of those experiences. One time I was exiting a subway in New York. I stopped because I noticed a store I needed to go to, and just then a large flower pot slammed into the sidewalk in front of me, exploding into 1,000 pieces. If I hadn't paused for that split second, that pot would have taken my head off. I'm a comedian, and I nearly got killed by a flower pot to the head. Are you serious? That was the only time in the past decade I've believed in God. I was like, oh, you, Lord. Yeah, real funny. Take out the comedian with the flower pot. Why not a grand piano? Why not a coyote riding an anvil? Why not send a clown shoe from 1,000 feet up to tear through me faster than a McDonald's sandwich? Maybe cotton candy could rain down afterwards at some sort of comedic orgasm. You. The point is, and I do have one, after the initial anger, something about that near-death experience really brought things into focus for me. Nearly dying is like eating a bottle of Adderall. You see what matters. You have trouble caring about the stupid that consumes our lives, the TV shows and the celebrity pregnancy rumors. Instead, you care about love, art, justice, beauty, the poetry of life, the songs of awareness. So this brings me to my plan. I want to create a service where you can pay to have a near-death experience. I'll call it Your Pants Incorporated. And for a small fee, we will nearly kill you. Of course, we'll have to kill a few people here and there to keep our credibility, but the vast majority of our clients will come out as new men and women. They'll walk away going, if you include the time I spend working at home, I spend like 16 hours a day moving numbers around on a computer screen. But I'm only here one time. That's all I get, this one chance. And I never know when I'm going to get pushed into a vat of earthworms and grubs just before 25 angry badgers are released into a small closet with me, like it just happened. I didn't even know they liked grubs that much. But the point is, I never know when that could happen. What the flying am I doing with my life? I just spent every dime I made in the past 3 months on a sailboat, and I like sailing as much as I like Norwegian log dancing. Everybody would walk away like that. It would cause them to change their consciousness and their underwear. This has been your Moment of Clarity from LeeCamp.net. Support Moment of Clarity by just leaving a comment or giving it a thumbs up, sharing it with friends, and I'll ask you again, when did you learn what really matters in life?
No plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Fighter like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Yes, you are. Welcome back to Talking Left. Hope everybody's enjoying their morning or whatever time you may be listening. If you're checking out the podcast or listening over on YouTube.
Or in Australia.
Free. Or in Australia, yeah.
A lot of Australian listeners I've heard. A lot of comments. lot of comments.
I am surprised that there are international listeners when you look at, where downloads come from. I'm like, how the hell did they find our show?
They're spammers. Come on. We have a lot of fans in Russia.
Unlikely, but yeah, I agree with you. They're probably spammers. Spammers. Maybe that's what
But we love them if they listen.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Let us know. We'll give you a shout out.
Sure.
Speaking of
they'll probably charge us $60 to get the ones that they they cannot get into this site. Of course, I shouldn't challenge them.
Don't
but it's
challenge
the ones where in order to get rid of this, here's the software, you have to buy it.
Yes, we do apologize for anybody who ever wants to leave comments on the sites, but due to hacking of previous sites, we found it's just better not to have comments there. You're always welcome to leave comments on our Facebook page
and YouTube.
And you could send us a message on Twitter. We welcome all your comments, positive or otherwise. But spammers, maybe that's what we should call the NRA, because what they say is essentially about as meaningful and truthful as what you get from spammers. Maybe they are also the Iranian prince that has a million, or where's the country always?
The
Somalian prince that I have.
Nigerian.
Yes, Nigerian prince. I have millions of dollars, and I want to give it all to you. I just need a few $1,000s to get it out of hock, essentially. But yeah, that's about how honest their claims are recently. The NRA, as well as major gun retailers and manufacturers, met with Vice President Joe Biden this week. And according to the NRA, they were prepared to have a meaningful conversation. However, the NRA claims it's willing to consider school safety, mental health issues, the marketing of violence to our kids, and the collapse of federal prosecutions of violent crimes.
I love that last one.
Yeah.
Since they've advocated and the politicians they paid for have essentially defunded the ATF, not allowed a head of the ATF to be confirmed, etc., so they can't really prosecute them because their investigative branch has been decimated by their policies. But you aren't prosecuting enough.
Yeah, and I'm sure that probably has nothing to do with maybe people who sit on boards of gun manufacturers and also for private prisons. Just going to go out on a limb there.
There you go.
You know, I'm sure you wouldn't find any crossover there.
So their list of things they were willing to talk about was everything except guns.
Exactly. The glaring omission in that statement is the sale of guns and ammunition. Essentially, they have resisted any gun control, and so therefore, how could they have any meaningful conversation? They weren't interested in any meaningful conversation that actually included all options being on the table. Another really misleading claim they have spoken about recently is, quote, the White House has an agenda to attack the Second Amendment. Yes, this is their new talking point, that Obama's actual relaxing of gun laws during his first 4 terms, that was just to get you comfortable so that he could sneak in the gun control and take away your guns later in his second term. Right. That just paranoid much? Like, perhaps they should join this James Tracy guy, and because they're as much of a conspiracy theorist as he is. And the third, this is all according to an article on Think Progress, the administration continues to insist on pushing failed solutions. They're referring to the assault weapons ban, background checks, restrictions on high-capacity magazines, and expanded mental health service. Those are what the NRA calls, quote, failed solutions, which is an oxymoron, by the way. Just
never even thought of that. Yeah,
failed solutions. You may want to rethink that term, NRA.
Oh no, it works perfectly for them.
Yes, but in fact, all evidence points to the contrary. Since the repeal of the assault weapons ban, mass shootings have dramatically increased, and studies show that the firepower of gunmen, how many rounds and how quickly they can actually shoot and injure or kill people, has jumped significantly. Half of all the mass shootings that have ever occurred in this country, half, occurred since the assault weapons ban expired. I mean, if that's not eye-opening, what is? It's time to get these guns off the
streets. Essentially, they point to one mass shooting that occurred during it and say, therefore, it didn't work.
Right.
Because any solution that involves guns has to be a 100%. It's going to fix everything anywhere. And if it doesn't fix this one you're talking about right now, then there's no point in doing it.
Yes, then it is a failed solution.
That wouldn't stop this one. That wouldn't stop this one. So let's not do it.
Well, we're going to get into something that is going to be a bit controversial next. The question we're going to dig into is, did the 14th Amendment essentially repeal the Second? We're going to have an analysis and some interesting information for you coming up next, right here on Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thanks for checking us out wherever you're listening on We Act Radio, TalkingLeft.com, SoFlo Radio, Progressive Blend. Thank you wherever you are. We'll be right back.
The ivory tower of academia has become overshadowed by a new edifice on campus that is reaching ridiculous heights, the Tower of Mammon. As public universities have been driven by budget-whacking lawmakers to seek ever more private funding, what were once centers of free thinking are increasingly dominated by corporate sales gimmicks. A lot of schools are taking a much more corporate approach, exulted a PR executive who works with top administrators, marveling that, quote, a CMO didn't even exist on most campuses 10 years ago. A what? A chief marketing officer. Marketing what? As explained by the CMO of the University of California system, the changing funding landscape requires universities to sell themselves to moneyed elites, which means academic institutions must rework what he calls their visual identities. Forget intellectual pursuits, we're talking about corporate branding, complete with the kind of ridiculous come-ons that hawkers of consumer products often barf up. Iowa's Drake University, for example, rebranded itself a couple of years ago with the slogan, Drake Plus. That was intended to sell students and donors alike on the clever equation that Drake plus U would equal remarkable results, even excellence. This might have been just an inane but innocuous bit of PR puffery, except that the school's marketing geniuses chose to reach for PR artistry, substituting the letter D to refer to Drake. Yes, that meant that the official brand they created to characterize their institution of higher learning was D+. Not exactly a standard of academic excellence. This is Jim Hightower saying educational achievement is not a product of marketers, but of educators. A school with plenty of good teachers will sell itself. So here's a concept. Fire the CMO and hire a couple more teachers.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Barely a week into the new year and economic policies loom large. The AFL-CIO says with 155,000 new jobs added in December, America still needs new policies to really make a dent in long-term unemployment. Austerity, the Labor Federation says, is a foolish path because austerity kills economic recoveries. The AFL-CIO is joined with La Raza, SEIU, the Center for Community Change, the Economic Policy Institute, the Leadership Conference, and other groups to advocate for prosperity economics. As the President and Congress confront the national debt, tax policies, and other fiscal issues, the groups have issued a report laying out an alternative to austerity economics. The central conclusion of the report is that there is no inevitable trade-off between creating a strong, dynamic economy and fostering a society marked by greater health, broader security, increased equality of opportunity, and more broadly distributed growth. The report says when government plays a more active role in the economy through investments in education and science, economies are more dynamic and innovative. The report, called Prosperity Economics, Building an Economy for All, says we can afford to build America's productive capacity, reconnect earnings and economic security to overall productivity, and preserve a strong social safety net while building a robust economy. The report recommends major infrastructure investments in guaranteeing all qualified students the chance for a college education. The report also calls for empowering workers to engage in collective bargaining so that wages rise with productivity and economic security for working people is strengthened, the opposite of austerity economics. The merger of two nurses' unions will likely lead to a new fight for Kaiser workers in California. Jesse Russell reports.
The California Nurses Association has forged an alliance with the National Union of Healthcare Workers. The merger comes after the expiration of a non-competition agreement between the CNA and the Service Employees International Union. The CNA doesn't plan to renew that agreement, and it likely signals a move by the new NUHW-CNA to launch a new effort to convince 43,000 Kaiser Permanente workers to leave the SEIU. The NUHW lost an election against the SEIU in 2010, but in late 2012, the National Labor Relations Board found that Kaiser had violated federal labor laws by withholding raises from workers who had been fomenting a break with the SEIU in favor of the other union. A new election will take place this year. The CNA represents 85,000 healthcare workers in the state of California.
In New York City, the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 1181, is working to avert a possible school bus strike while trying to protect jobs. Thousands of bus drivers and their supporters rallied over the weekend. The union says the city is cutting costs by bidding out jobs with private companies, and without protections in the new contract, many experienced drivers could suddenly lose their jobs. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It takes 12 years to create a graduate. It takes about the same time to create a dropout. And at the end of the day, the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be you. So United Way is asking you to make a pledge. Tutor a child who needs help. Mentor a kid who needs someone on their side. Volunteer to read to children. Because when a child advances, we all advance. Be a reader, tutor or mentor. Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Take the pledge now at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We're going to get into something few people may have heard, although it was reported this week.
2 days ago.
By Tom Hartman.
You know what's going on, though, coming up next week?
The inauguration?
Yeah, there's a few things.
Just
we need
a
to talk
few.
about in this show.
Oh, yes. Just the last. That's right. We have some big news for next week. We will have Chris Lavoie.
In studio,
the
because
executive
the
producer
Stephanie Miller
of the
Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour will be in D.C.
Yes, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to D.C. If you're listening and you haven't gotten your tickets, there may be a few left over at sexyliberal.com. Definitely go and check it out. I know all the meet and grope tickets are sold out, but you may be able to get
all the
some
seats
other
are awesome.
seats.
In fact, we've gone and we said, no, we don't want, because, you get to meet everybody afterwards. Regularly because, we do stuff with them. But, the regular seats are awesome.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
We've gone to how many? 4 shows?
I think so.
And only the first time where we, up close. All the seats are awesome.
Yes.
And it's worthwhile. It is fun. It's a great way to spend Saturday.
Regardless of what your political views are, it's hilarious.
Yeah. Inclusive. They're not going to, there's all kinds of jokes.
Yes. And all 4 sexy liberals will be there along with two very big guests. I don't know who they are.
No idea.
But they will not disappoint considering some of the amazing guests and amazing personalities they have had.
There's a few people who are going to be in town, so it's really hard to narrow down.
Yeah, I have
weekend.
no idea. I'm not even trying to guess at this one.
We have ruled out it will not be President Obama.
I'm going to say
they've
a
actually
safe
ruled
assumption.
that one. They've ruled that one out. So. Hey, stranger things have happened. They've had big people.
Yes. Okay. So we've been talking about the NRA and the Second Amendment. Many people today believe that the Second Amendment has one of 2 reasons for being there. Either protection, personal protection against attack, animals, guard your family, whatever you want to believe, or protection against the government, known as the insurrectionist theory. But few people have considered that it's neither. That the Second Amendment wasn't written for either of those reasons, but something else and something much darker entirely, much more sinister. The Second Amendment was, in fact, more complex and more interesting than ever previously understood. And Professor Carl T. Bogus of the UC Davis Law Review writes in The Hidden History of the Second Amendment that it was, in fact, written for a much different reason. It was written for the purpose of getting the southern states to sign the Constitution, specifically Virginia. And how did they do that, you might ask? Well, it was...
A little bit of background, though.
Okay.
Constitution did not require ratification by all the states.
No, it only needed 9 states.
It needed 9. And 9 months after...
the Philadelphia Convention.
8 states.
Yes.
Had ratified, so they were 1 away. So this is 9 months down the road, in an era where things like this didn't take quite as long. Some things took longer, but they were essentially they may have had to gone back to the drawing board because they're operating under the Articles of Confederation.
Right.
And there were the anti-federalists. They'd been writing letters back and forth using the New York newspapers. Federalists were for ratification, anti-federalists were against it. And The Anti-Federalists just wanted to amend, essentially, the Articles of Confederation. The Federalists wanted to ratify this new Constitution. And the Anti-Federalists were really upset because the Constitution was quite a radical document compared to the Articles of Confederation. But James Madison, being a Virginian, being very much in favor of the Constitution as author, figured out how to thread this needle because the Anti-Federalists were using fear to get the Virginia delegates to vote against the ratification of the Constitution. They narrowed it down to Virginia, essentially, because they knew where the other states stood. So, take it from there.
So, yes, they needed Virginia. It was the 9th state, and many people were uncertain that the United States as a whole, as the Constitution would have created, could succeed without Virginia. Virginia's biggest fear was that the northern states would essentially allow the northern states, in enacting the Constitution, would outlaw slavery, would undermine the slave system by using the newly acquired constitutional authority over the militia to disarm the state militia and thereby destroying the South's principal instrument of slave control. That's what the Second Amendment was written for.
Right. So the Anti-Federalists were running around telling Virginians that, you use these militia, these armed militia in the South, to keep your slaves under control, because in a lot of areas there's lots and lots of slaves and just very few slave owners.
Right.
They were worried about insurrections of the slave rebellion, and that due to numbers, and that there had been many actually examples of where slaves had revolted, killing white people in the South, and that they had to use these militia and these guns, and they actually had laws in the states for these militia to keep these slaves under control. So what the Anti-Federalists were telling Virginia is, see all this power this federal government has? You know what they're going to do next? They're going to tell you, you personally can't have a gun anymore. You can't have a gun, and therefore, without actually outlawing slavery, they're going to end slavery because you won't be able to control your slaves.
Well, and beyond end slavery, they were essentially taking this as a personal threat against their lives and their well-being. For instance, in Virginia, the state was living in a state of perpetual fear. 44% of Virginia's population was black, and in some areas, particularly in the eastern parts of the state, blacks were the majority. White slave owners were ever mindful that if the right opportunity presented itself, blacks might cut their heads off, and this is not hyperbole. And
you're quoting directly from
the article. This article goes on to describe a very awful situation where, insurrectionist slaves essentially took over and decapitated some white men, leaving their heads on the steps of a store. In response, in Virginia, the entire white population was ordered under arms, was ordered to take up guns, and a desperate manhunt was conducted to find the rebels responsible for this event. Eventually, everyone in the South, particularly in Virginia, knew the story of what is now known as the Stono Rebellion, and it was the largest and best known of slave insurrections. Essentially, this was their story, used to spread fear, used to
their fear card, their Fox fear card.
Right. Used to enforce the rule of what is now known as militias and what is written in the Second Amendment.
It was then known as militia. That's how they defined militia.
Right. This is a description from this law review article. The basic instrument of control was the slave patrol. Armed groups of white men who made regular rounds. The patrols made sure blacks were not wandering where they did not belong, gathering in groups, or engaging in other suspicious activity. It goes on to state, the state required white men and female plantation owners to participate in the patrols and provide their own arms and equipment, although the rich were permitted to send servants in their place. These were the militias. The militias actually
defined as such and regulated as such.
Right.
The states regulated they were well-regulated militias within the states.
Right. So
this is to what they were referring when Madison wrote the Second Amendment.
Exactly. That is the well-regulated militia that everybody refers to. And the argument has always been the militia being, what we're seeing now, where is it, Tennessee and other states creating their own quote-unquote militias versus the standing army versus the National Guard. But in fact, it was none of those. And this was a group of people solely there to ensure the protection of slavery, to allow slavery, one of our country's darkest parts of history, one of the worst historical things about our nation, to exist. That was the purpose of these militias. They were the first and last protection from the omnipresent threat of slave insurrection, according to Professor Carl T. Bogus in this UC Davis Law Review article. After the war, in which the southern states, I believe they're referring to the Revolutionary War here, he doesn't state. After the war, the militia remained the principal means of protecting social order and preserving white control over an enormous black population. That is the vile, hidden history of the Second Amendment.
So, Virginia, the anti-federalists are scaring the heck out of Virginians, saying, if you ratify this Constitution, the North is going to outlaw your personal guns.
And therefore,
slave insurrections, you could get decapitated, and at the very least, slavery's over.
Right. So the Second Amendment was put in the Constitution
so Madison
to say,
says, here's our compromise.
Right. To say, we will not take your guns.
In fact, we cannot.
Yes.
We cannot take your well-regulated militias' guns.
Right.
Your well-regulated militias being those groups that protect against slave insurrection. That's what we're going to write in the Constitution. So now, Virginia, you can go ahead and ratify it.
Right. And the reason they even specify state in that amendment is to ensure that the newly created federal government couldn't call the militia into war and take them away from those southern states,
right,
and leave the slave owners and plantation owners vulnerable to insurrection. So the question stands, with the passage of the 14th Amendment outlawing slavery, now that we know what this militia, as referenced in the Second Amendment, means, we're
talking to Justice Scalia and all the originalists out there who say you're supposed to look at the words, how they meant at the time they were written.
So we no longer need militias as defined in the Constitution.
They're no longer necessary.
So does the 14th Amendment, which finally brought our country into humane, or at least started the path there, humane treatment of all its citizens.
At least recognition of them as people, even though they weren't treated that way for 100 years. And
That's
arguably
true.
Not even now in some areas.
Yes, very true. But did the passage of the 14th Amendment effectively repeal the Second Amendment? You no longer need a militia.
Because the premise of the Second Amendment was a well-regulated militia being necessary.
So?
If it's no longer necessary under the 14th Amendment, the militia as it was understood then, isn't the Second Amendment therefore repealed?
I think it's an excellent argument. I personally would love to see that used to repeal the Second Amendment.
And the first time you go before the Supreme Court, they're going to laugh.
Yes, and now I'm not an anti, ban all guns, take all guns away. I'm not that person.
But leave it to the states
to
regulate them without that Second Amendment right.
Right, absolutely, and create modern legislation that effectively deals with
modern weapons.
Right, assault weapons and gun sales and gun show loopholes and all of the rest. It's time for our nation to address this problem realistically and not continue to allow those in control to say the only way to stop guns is get more guns.
Right, and to say that the first time you go before the Supreme Court they may laugh. What about the third time, the fourth time? Because for a very long time, for hundreds of years, we had this collective theory of the Second Amendment. And it took about 2 decades of writings by the NRA we talked about to switch it to an individual right. These types of articles that actually look at what the people writing the Constitution, writing the Bill of Rights had to say at the time, and more information about that could sway the opinion of what the Second Amendment means.
It also gives those of us who like to debate the Second Amendment right and what it means with our right-wing friends and family members a whole different argument, because now we can ask them if they're proud of the fact that they're defending a very racist part of the Constitution, a part of the Constitution that was essentially just put there to keep people enslaved in this country. If they're pro that right, what's their opinion on it now? And I'm sure that you'll spend more time debating on whether or not that's the fact. But let me tell you, you can go and Google The Hidden History of the Second Amendment by Carl T. Bogus and read all about it. And if they still want to argue with you, let them at least admit that they are racist.
So there are racial underpinnings to the original Second Amendment. One could argue that it's still happening today.
Absolutely.
Chicago.
Yeah. What is that code word for?
Right. And when in the South, when they think of an intruder, I'll tell you the picture they have in their head.
It's not even just Chicago. They use words like gang members, criminals, and what they're trying to impart on people.
Of course.
Yes. So time to end the racism in this country and repeal the Second Amendment. That's what I'm for. You could share your thoughts with us at our Facebook page, Talking Left with Danielle and Shano, or of course over on Twitter at
and
Talking
share
Left.
The story.
Share the story.
Tom Hartman did it, on Friday. Did it first. You heard it there first.
Yeah.
But repeat it.
And I'm sure he did.
Read it for yourself and decide for yourself if you this is footnoted like crazy. This is not just pulled out of someone's butt.
No.
All the documentation and backup is here. Read it for yourself, and if you agree, pass it on. That's the most important part. Pass it on.
Yes. We do have to run to a break. We are a bit late, but that was important stuff that we wanted to share with you. So we're going to be right back here on Talking Left. And in just a few minutes, we're going to be speaking with Mitch Malasky of the DC Sports Beat on We Act Radio to talk about all the NFL news and more. So don't go anywhere. This is Talking Left, and we'll be right back.
So, who is responsible for these outrages? It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
My name is Joe Thompson. I'm 29 years old and I have a career that I love as a systems analyst. Career. It still sounds cool to say that word. I never could have gotten on this path without a college degree. And if the college me were here, he'd tell you.
I never would have gotten to college without big brothers, big sisters. I could have ended up anywhere, on the streets even. But college? Joe Thompson? Not likely. My big brother helped me out. He taught me I could do anything, at a time when a lot of people were saying just the opposite.
And to a 7-year-old, that means a lot. My big brother's name is Phil. And Phil is the reason that this 7-year-old grows up to be a systems analyst.
Whether you donate money or time, you're helping Big Brothers Big Sisters help a child. And that can last a lifetime. Start something today at BigBrothersBigSisters.org. Brought to you by Big Brothers Big Sisters and the Ad Council.
Breast health awareness is critical for all women, particularly African Americans, because we have an increased risk of dying from breast cancer compared to women of other backgrounds. At U of M, I'm doing research here and with women in Ghana to look for an inherited link that makes African and African American women susceptible to a more aggressive type of cancer. Finding this link, I believe, will make new treatments possible. But right now, making sure that you are properly screened is our best protection.
With experts like Dr. Lisa Newman, the University of Michigan Health System is a leader in cancer care. When you call our free Cancer Answer line at 800-865-1125, an oncology nurse will answer any questions you might have about the prevention, screening, and treatment of breast cancer and other forms of cancer. All calls are confidential. Call 800-865-1125 or visit uofmhealth.org/cancer answer line.
We're working to help everyone enjoy longer, healthier lives.
That's the Michigan difference.
Hey there, Matthew Filipovich here, host of the creatively titled Matthew Filipovich Show, which, by the way, you can hear every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. right here on 1480 a.m. We Act Radio. Now, I'm going to be honest with you people. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I like talking to smart people who are smarter than me, some of the smartest, funniest, most badass progressives out there. People like Glenn Greenwald, Naomi Klein, Jane Cougar of the Young Turks, Jamie Kilstein, Allison Kilkenny, Alan Grayson, Jeremy Scahill, Jim Hightower, and more. That's right, I said more. Don't believe me? Well, tune in to the Matthew Filipovich Show every single Saturday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. for some of the best in liberal talk, news, comedy, and interviews right here on 1480 AM We Act Radio.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
How lucky can one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me. Like the fella once said, ain't that a kick in the head?
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Just have a couple minutes here before we're going to have to run and get Mitch Malasky, host of DC Sports Beat, 7 to 9 p.m. on Sundays on
Did you not approve
Radio.
of that song?
That, I just have to shake my head. Because I wanted to tell you first about CTE. It's a term a lot of people have heard in the sports media recently, as Junior Seau was recently diagnosed post-mortem of having this condition. CTE, otherwise known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, is a progressive degenerative disease of the brain found in athletes and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. This makes me worry with all the times I've hit my head and taken out windshields. The trauma triggers progressive degeneration of the brain tissue, including the buildup of abnormal protein called tau, T-A-U, and it's associated with conditions such as memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, and eventually progressive dementia. And 33 players who played in the NFL have recently been confirmed to have this condition, according to Boston University. 33 players from the repetitive concussions that they
Out of
suffer.
how many people that they've looked at? How many players they've looked at?
Well, they recently confirmed 50 cases in former football players, 33 of which who played in the NFL. They didn't say how many they looked at.
I thought they looked at something like 19 brains and 18 had it.
Well, Boston University says 33 players.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm thinking of a different stat then.
Yeah.
It was a ridiculously high percentage.
It's 33 players. I mean, have we had 33 players pass away in recent years? You know, that I think it couldn't have been
six. There's been 6 suicides of late.
Yes, 6. Of course, most notably Javon Belcher, who murder-suicide with him and his girlfriend. Dave Durison, Ray Easterlin, Junior Seau, Kurt Crane, and O.J. Murdoch have all killed themselves just since 2011. And many researchers and sports analysts are now saying CTE may be to blame. So we're going to speak with Mitch Malasky of the DC Sports Beat and get his opinion on it. You know, is this acceptable risk of playing professional football, or is there more that can be done? That and more when we speak with him in just a few minutes. We'll be right back here on Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Don't go anywhere. Sports news coming up on Talking Left.
It reflects the drama of the human experience, and isn't that the essence of art?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Good news, America. At last, scientists are grappling with a persistent affliction that can strike without warning, causing anxiety for millions of families every year. It's the tragedy of needle drop. No, not drug injection needles, Christmas tree needles. Each December, you search out the finest and freshest conifer, pay good money for it, give it water and love, decorate it beautifully, and how does it repay you? Within 2 to 4 weeks, the ingrate is shedding needles all over your carpet. It's the scourge of Christmas, I tell you. But take heart, for your tax-funded land-grant colleges are on the way to rescue you and all other needle drop sufferers. Specifically, plant pathologists at Washington State University, North Carolina State, and elsewhere have mounted a $1.3 million RNA sequencing trial. They're sampling branches from thousands of trees in search of that one nucleotide polymorphism that controls needle drop. This heroic mission requires remarkable attention to detail. For example, in Puyallup, Washington, a research specialist lifts each of several thousand sample branches in her lab one by one, rubs her fingers up and down each stem, then counts the needles that fall from each one. Another specialist enters the number into an ever-spreading spreadsheet. It's a tedious job, but someone has to do it. Or not. Really, of all the problems facing American consumers and agriculture, should Christmas needle retention be this high on our list of research priorities? Well, responds the chief needle drop pathologist at Washington State, the Christmas tree industry is a $1 billion industry. This is Jim Hightower saying, exactly. So let this profitable industry pay for its own research, rather than diverting our tax funds and government scientists from more important work that will produce much greater public benefit.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. A potential class action lawsuit could determine how responsible companies need to be when it comes to third-party contract labor. Jesse Russell reports.
A federal judge has ruled that Walmart can be included in a class action lawsuit filed by workers for a contract warehouse. The Inland Empire, California warehouse is operated by Schneider Logistics, and the employees have targeted the company with allegations of wage theft. While Walmart doesn't directly own the warehouse, the workers argue that the company has ultimate say over how the workers are treated and could apply pressure to ensure they're treated right by contractors. The world's largest retailer has argued that the workers aren't employed by the company, but Walmart is still taking the concern seriously. Walmart is putting in place auditors to inspect contractors in the United States. The case could determine how involved major corporations who rely heavily on contract labor are responsible for how workers hired by their contractors are treated.
The Labor Combat Organizing College's mission is to increase the number of non- and anti-union company signatories to union construction jobs and to do it without going through the National Labor Relations Board. Danny Caliendo is the Labor Combat College's lead instructor. Labor Combat uses tactics and technology to train organizers, primarily in the building trades. Caliendo says that the Labor Combat College's tactics are designed to be highly effective in so-called right-to-work states to fight for better wages and benefits for building trades workers.
The day you stop fighting for your rights to have a living wage and to have a good benefit and so on and so forth, the day you're going to die. And we've been dying slowly, unfortunately, for the better part of 3 decades, and 24 right-to-work states kind of emphasize that fact. We've had 102 people through the program since May. They have a money-back offer. They don't like what they hear. They think it's BS. Don't pay us. We haven't not had a check given to us yet.
The International Association of Machinists is at GKN Aerospace in Amityville, New York today, campaigning for support from the workers in a union representation election to be held Friday, January 11th. The IAM says the company has hired union-busting consultants to wage a relentless anti-union campaign. The union says 2 pro-union workers were fired just before Christmas. The IAM has contracts with GKN Aerospace facilities like in St. Louis, where the union workers make about $5 an hour more and pay 30 to 40% less for their health care. This newscast made possible in part through underwriting support from the National Association of Letter Carriers, the OPEIU, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Hey, Dad, how do you throw a curveball? How do you build a fort? How do refrigerators run? How do fish learn how to swim?
Kids ask a lot of questions.
How high can you jump?
But you don't have to know every answer.
How many phone numbers are there?
Because you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent.
How do cell phones work?
There are thousands of children in foster care who don't need every question answered.
What's electricity?
They just need you.
What's the moon made of?
For more information on how you can adopt, go to adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Unfiltered truth, news, and opinion. Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
You can always go back to Rome and Greece, and then let's face it, kingdoms. You know, it wasn't until a couple hundred years ago that we realized that, hey, monarchies don't work. Let's think of another kind of system of governance. You know, it's something a little less hierarchical, if you will, or at least concentrated power. Then again, when you're dealing with money, capitalism is about money and the exchange of money, then concentrated power works really well.
Radio or not, and filterfreeradio.com.
Progressives across the country are taking action from Madison, Wisconsin to the Occupy movement. And now, Washington, D.C.'s newest talk radio station, We Act Radio. In this election year, Progressive Talk returns to our nation's capital. We Act Radio is proud to showcase the biggest names in Progressive Talk Radio, including Stephanie Miller, Tom Hartman, Bill Press, Ed Schultz, Sam Cedar, and original live shows from our Anacostia studios. Take Action News with David Schuster, Speak Easy with Kamon Freeman and Ron Pinchback, and The Inside Scoop with Mark Levine. Available on your radio dial and on the web at weactradio.com. That's We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM in Washington, D.C. Truth is our product.
Yes, we can.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Joining us now is the one and only Mitch Malasky of DC Sports Beat, WEAC's own sports show every Sunday, 7 to 9 p.m. Mitch, thank you so much for getting up early with us on a Sunday.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Oh, okay. Shane didn't know which computer I had you on, so... we were talking before we got you on about all these recent suicides in the NFL and the news of CTE. So we figured we needed an expert to give us his opinion. What's your thoughts on this and your response to people who say, you know, they should know that football is a rough sport and kind of, you know, they get paid well, so tough?
Certainly. Well, I wish I was a neurologist to be a true expert on CTE, but from a sports perspective, I think that is the difficulty that the sport is facing right now. It seems obvious to all of us now in retrospect. Repeated hits to the head might cause damage later in life. But, 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, that did not seem so obvious to a lot of people. Just how smoking didn't, seem to be obvious. It wouldn't hurt you. In the 50s, hitting your head over and over again didn't seem to be too big of a problem to a general public, although some say that the NFL had scientific evidence as early as the 60s that the repeated brain traumas would cause at least be an issue in later life for players.
Wow,
and so
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that the NFL could be kind of culpable in all of these deaths.
Well, so there are actually a number of lawsuits. I believe the number is up to 175 players who have, I just looked it up, 195 plus concussion-related lawsuits, according to NFLconcussionlitigation.com, which is the lawyer who's working with, to bring a lot of these lawsuits together. But there's a number of lawsuits from players, former players, and their families who are trying to get money from the NFL and from Commissioner Roger Goodell, are claiming that the NFL has either denied them benefits or that they should have been given more knowledge and information before suiting up about the issues that they would face in later life. Because we are seeing Junior Seau is the most recent and the biggest name. It was just announced this week on Wednesday. The study was released that discovered that he did have CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Yeah, that was a better job than I did at pronouncing that, by the way.
Which is essentially, and again, if I can go to the from the website from the Center for Study of Traumatic Encephalopathy, it's a progressive degenerative disease of the brain found in athletes and others with repetitive brain trauma. And symptomatic concussions as well as asymptomatic concussions to the head. It's associated with memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, and eventually progressive dementia. And so this is the reason why most of the players are committing suicide, is essentially they cannot live with these effects of CTE. The unfortunate part of CTE is it's impossible to diagnose while you're alive, at least now. The only way to diagnose it is after you're already dead. And so that's one reason why you're seeing Junior Seau and other athletes such as Dave Doerson, who was about a year ago, he was a player for the Chicago Bears, committing suicide by shooting themselves in the chest. So specifically, their brains are left intact so they can be studied to discover if they had this disease.
Now, Mitch, this is Shane here. I have a question on these lawsuits. Are they claiming that the NFL knew about this?
So, yeah, some of them are. There are people who are saying that the NFL had scientific evidence that they were withholding from players as early as the 60s, I believe, so 60s or 70s. So some people are saying, yes, you should have known, you should have taken more precaution. But part of the problem and the real problem is, this is something that we now know is going to happen, and players still are willing to get a concussion and suck it up and go back into the game. So part of the problem is really with the sport itself, and how much do we and do athletes accept, if I'm participating, this is, a likely outcome for the rest of my life. And I think that's the intersection where we are at now. Whereas, 20 years ago, when they didn't think it was as big of an issue, whatever, you could play football, it wasn't going to, didn't think it would matter. Whereas now it's a really, it's a decision. And if you go into it, you're going to get concussions. Right. You might blow out knees, blow out whatever else.
See, that's the issue.
It's difficult for the NFL.
If they held it back from them, then they've got a case. But now that everyone knows, if they tell them ahead of time, before you go into this game, this may happen to you, then you're assuming the risk. So people going forward, players going forward, will not be able to sue, probably. I'm not going to predict what juries are going to do. And on top of it, so therefore, there's the lawsuits to deal with people when they covered it up, but now it's the question going forward. How do we reduce this risk? How do we minimize it? Is there a way to minimize it, or is it just a risk you're going to have to take for playing the game?
So I think the unfortunate truth is part of it is the last part. It's an unfortunate risk of playing the game. Football is an inherently violent sport. The whole point is to hit somebody, use your body to go and hit somebody else. If you think that isn't, or couldn't cause long-term damage, I think in these days, I think you've got to be crazy. But I think there are definitely ways to try to curb that and to try to make less prevalent. The way that the NFL is really pushing and that others are pushing is to start from early age, start from Pop Warner and teach tackling correct. Teach the correct techniques to hit people in the chest with your head up instead of your head down, leading with your helmet as a weapon, because that's where a lot of these, that's where a lot of it starts. I mean, for every Junior Seau, there's 10 to 20 high schoolers who committed suicide because
wow. I haven't even considered.
High school kids, college kids.
I hadn't even considered that. That's
this whole thing reminds me of cigarettes. That for years they said, no, this isn't bad for you, and everyone said, duh, it's bad for you. Yeah. So the NFL's been saying, no, this will be fine, and then duh, it's bad for you. So it's going to be kind of the same thing. But go ahead, Danielle.
Well, it's just these injuries, and although this obviously very, very traumatic and leading to the death of so many individuals. But it also, makes me question situations like what just occurred with RG3 and, players being sent back out to play, fans angry at coaches and staff for an injury. But it circles back to many saying, it's football. It's a rough sport and people know they're going to get injured. That's why they make this extreme amount of money. Although I don't think they realize that those big name players make far more than, linemen who often take the brunt of the physical injury. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a slightly different situation, but definitely, related. It's about part of it is the heat of the moment and what us as fans expect. Got dinged up, went back in the game. What the players themselves expect. RG3 himself has said, "I'm the leader of this team. I'm the quarterback. I'm not coming out unless I feel like I can't." And so, I feel harder to blame Mike Shanahan for saying, "Oh, we're keeping you in the game," because, even though he could have gone over RG3's head and pulled him, this is a player saying, "I want to be there. I want to be out there," and who, had sort of had proven coaches wrong and everything that it seemed like he couldn't do before. That said, it is definitely, the coach's responsibility to look out for his players, whether it be a knee injury or a head injury. And it does seem that Mike Shanahan and some other coaches in the NFL certainly come down on the side of competition versus long-term health.
And if the game had turned out a different way, if they'd won, they'd both be heroes. Shanahan made the most brilliant decision ever, and RJ3 went out there and he fought through the injury, and they came out victorious, rah, 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 rah. But there is a serious issue as to, players want to stay in. Players are there, winners want to play when the game is on the line. And
especially, when you're talking about how much money they make, I mean, there are also direct repercussions for not playing. They say you never lose a job because of injury, but that happens all the time. I mean, just ask Alex Smith, who could have been starting in a playoff game last night, but instead his backup, Colin Kaepernick, who came in when Smith had a concussion himself, is starting, and Smith has never gotten his job back. So for a lot of these guys, that's a big-name quarterback. If you're an offensive lineman, who's not making as much money or who's not as guaranteed as much, you complain about a concussion, you're out for half a season, 4 games, that could be your spot on the team, that could be your career. So that's the other thing that's looming behind a lot of these players and the decisions that they make.
We are speaking with Mitch Malasky. He's the host of the DC Sports Beat on We Act Radio. So I have to ask, I know it's a little bit early, but Mitch, do you have any Super Bowl predictions? Any idea of who you think is going to make it?
Well, I could take the safe pick because 2 of the teams are already into the next round from yesterday. So we'll have 2 more games today, the Houston Texans against the New England Patriots, where most people and myself imagine the Patriots will prevail, though I think it'll be a lot closer than the drubbing they handed the Texans earlier this season. And then there's the late game today is the Seattle Seahawks against the top-ranked Atlanta Falcons, which is going to be a very close game. The Falcons have been one of the top teams in the league, but they have struggled in the playoffs, have not won a playoff game, I believe, since 2002. And the Seahawks are a lower-seeded team with rookie quarterback Russell Wilson, who have a lot of momentum, beat my Redskins last week. But if I got to look, I'd probably have to say the Patriots and the 49ers, the teams I like the most. Atlanta is a much better team at home, and they do have home field advantage through the NFL, through the NFC playoffs. So they'll, I think it would be easier for them. But the 49ers have a very dangerous offense and a much better defense. So I think they can make it. I really would love to have the Baltimore Ravens make it, even though Baltimore's nearby. Those of us in D.C., there's you either hate the Ravens because you want it to be a rivalry, or you sort of don't mind. I'm more on the latter end. I grew up a Baltimore Orioles fan, so Baltimore, whatever, that's fine. They're a second team. I can take that. So I'd love to see the Ravens win for that. For Ray Lewis, who's retiring, for Ed Reed, who I have a feeling might also retire with a little less fanfare after the season. I'd love for the Ravens to make it. Realistically, it seems like it could be Tom Brady and the Patriots in the AFC, but he hasn't, since winning their Super Bowl, his last one in 2004, Tom Brady in the playoffs has really not been that great. So we'll see how they do here in about 2 hours. But moving forward, I think a lot of great games. Certainly saw 2 great games yesterday, and expect 2 more today, 2 more next week, and a great Super Bowl coming up.
I'll not be watching that game because at 1:30, Mitch, I'll be watching Michigan versus Ohio State college basketball. As a Michigan grad, what's your pick on that game? 2 versus 15?
2 versus 15. I have to admit, college basketball is not as much of my forte.
You just say Michigan.
Go blue for today.
Okay.
All right. Well,
especially because Duke lost yesterday. That makes Michigan number one if they win today.
Yeah, you just made Shano and David Schuster very happy.
There you go.
And here in D.C., we're also very happy. Today's the opening of hockey training camp for our Capitals. So
cool.
We're just under a lockout, just lifted and came to an agreement this past week. So we're going to be talking about that and a whole lot more on the D.C. Sports Beat tonight on We Act Radio from 7 to 9. Including more about these brain injuries and everything else. But
that's awesome. Mitch, do you have a Twitter handle or some way that people can follow your sports analysis? I wasn't quite sure what it was.
On the graphic right now, I have Sunday 7 to 9 p.m. on We Act Radio. But
you can go to the DCSportsbeat.com. Goes right to our Facebook page. Is the best way to keep in touch with what we're doing. You can also follow us on Facebook. On Twitter at the DC Sports Beat or at Malarsk, Malarsk is my personal Twitter, which is I'm more of a Facebooker than a Twitterer. But either way, you can get it there, and We Act Radio, or excuse me, the DCSportsbeat.com.
Well, all of that is awesome, and I have to say it's really fun doing the sports news here on Talking Left. You know, we're always so buried in politics that perhaps we can drag you on more often if you don't mind getting up so early. But it really is fun changing subject and shifting gears and speaking with you, Mitch.
My pleasure. Love to do it again.
Awesome. Everybody check out Mitch Malasky on the DC Sports Beat. We Act Radio, 7 to 9 p.m. That's 1480 a.m. in Washington, D.C. And, of course, live on your phone and internet via all different apps, and as well as weactradio.com, dcsportsbeat.com, and check it out on Twitter at the DC Sports Beat. All the links will be up with the blog post on Talking Left. We are going to be right back. Mitch Malasky, thank you so much. Yes, awesome. Hopefully we can convince him to do that again, because it's nice getting a break from politics once in a while. I know not everybody is a sports fan, but hey, just consider it a welcome relief from gun talk.
No kidding.
Yes. Even preparing the segment with as interesting stuff as we did, we were like, okay, more gun news. So Mitch broke it up and did an awesome job. 7 to 9 p.m. on We Act Radio. We're going to get into more fun stuff, talk about how healthcare plays into this and the CTE injuries and disease going on through the NFL. So don't go anywhere. This is Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. You're checking us out live on We Act Radio, TalkingLeft.com, SoFlo Radio, Progressive Blend Radio, and we will be right back.
No plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Follow like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending. We got no plans.
A while back on a Moment of Clarity episode, I asked people when exactly they realized what really matters in life, what it qualifies as the meat of existence. When was the moment they understood it was borderline insane to devote themselves to inane treasures like clothing and cars and ridiculous shows of borrowed wealth, like spending $7,000 on wedding flower arrangements? Is that what those flowers are worth to you? A month of work if you can afford them and a year of debt if you can't? If they're worth that much, then why not give a about the forest where they grow? They're right there. They're right there. But no, we can't protect the forest because we need virgin growth wood pulp to make our toilet paper soft enough for our pristine asses. I can't just be wiping my ass with anything. This thing is a work of art, a rather large work of art. Would you wax a Lamborghini with sandpaper just because it happens to be the size of 6 Lamborghinis? And almost every single person said they realized what really mattered in life after nearly losing their life. I've had a few of those experiences. One time I was exiting a subway in New York. I stopped because I noticed a store I needed to go to, and just then a large flower pot slammed into the sidewalk in front of me, exploding into 1,000 pieces. If I hadn't paused for that split second, that pot would have taken my head off. I'm a comedian, and I nearly got killed by a flower pot to the head. Are you serious? That was the only time in the past decade I've believed in God. I was like, oh, you, Lord. Yeah, real funny. Take out the comedian with the flower pot. Why not a grand piano? Why not a coyote riding an anvil? Why not send a clown shoe from 1,000 feet up to tear through me faster than a McDonald's sandwich? Maybe cotton candy could rain down afterwards like some sort of comedic orgasm. You. The point is, and I do have one, after the initial anger, something about that near-death experience really brought things into focus for me. Nearly dying is like eating a bottle of Adderall. You see what matters. You have trouble caring about the stupid that consumes our lives, the TV shows and the celebrity pregnancy rumors. Instead, you care about love, art, justice, beauty, the poetry of life, the songs of awareness. So this brings me to my plan. I want to create a service where you can pay to have a near-death experience. I'll call it Your Pants Incorporated. And for a small fee, we will nearly kill you. Of course, we'll have to kill a few people here and there to keep our credibility, but the vast majority of our clients will come out as new men and women. They'll walk away going, if you include the time I spend working at home, I spend like 16 hours a day moving numbers around on a computer screen. But I'm only here one time. That's all I get, this one chance. And I never know when I'm going to get pushed into a vat of earthworms and grubs just before 25 angry badgers are released into a small closet with me, like it just happened. I didn't even know they liked grubs that much. But the point is, I never know when that could happen. What the flying am I doing with my life? I just spent every dime I made in the past 3 months on a sailboat, and I like sailing as much as I like Norwegian log dancing. Everybody would walk away like that. It would cause them to change their consciousness and their underwear. This has been your Moment of Clarity from LeeCamp.net. Support Moment of Clarity by just leaving a comment or giving it a thumbs up, sharing it with friends, and I'll ask you again, when did you learn what really matters in life?
No plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Fighter like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. We are running a little behind this morning, so we're just going to give you a
as we're coming in, I'm like, we should be breaking now.
Yeah, we should be going out. No, not coming in. But we just want to give you a quick tease about what's coming up in the next hour. And it's related to this recent Politico report from Friday, where they're actually stating the double-digit price increases, premium increases from healthcare expected in 2013 are all the results of Obamacare.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's not the case. In fact, only 2% of premium increases, less than 2 actually, 1.5%, are possibly related to Obamacare.
And if your premiums only went up by 1.5%, that would be less than inflation. That'd be a good thing. That'd be flattening the rate of increase.
Yes, but while companies like Aetna in Pennsylvania, one of the largest insurers in the country, seeks to increase rates by 16.49%, and in its filing to justify those increases, it states that they are attributed to, quote, the cost of providing health care service to policyholders. The Affordable Care Act is only responsible for a very, very tiny, small portion of that increase. And perhaps, itty bitty tiny, perhaps with the Affordable Care Act and better health care, those NFL players we were just talking about wouldn't have so much to worry about. But we're going to get into that and so much more, and the changes to Obamacare that you need to know about coming in 2013. That and more coming up on Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Stick around.
A new fad is sweeping across America's university campuses, and it's seriously goofy. This latest craze is not led by students making a cultural statement, but by top administrators trying to make a corporate statement. It's called rebranding, an attempt to modernize the image of venerable institutions by adopting corporate-style logos, slogans, and other marketing fluff. For example, for 144 years, the University of California has thrived under an official seal featuring a bright star beaming onto an open book with a banner proclaiming, "Let there be light." Straightforward and rather elegant. But it's so old school, cried the rebranders, so out of sync with today's market-oriented world, especially now that universities are multi-billion-dollar conglomeratized enterprises run not by academicians, but by highly paid executives whose chief role is to charm money out of wealthy individuals and corporate benefactors. Forget light. Let there be money is the new academic aspiration. Thus, the UC system was rebranded with an abstract U-shaped logo with the letter C subtly burned into it. It looks very much like a logo for a bank. And that's the point, for it's meant to impress money people. As explained by the CMO of UC, the university needed to do a more proactive job in expressing where the university was headed. Yes, and what better way to do that than by resorting to PR artifice and corporate gobbledygook, right? All you need to know about where universities are headed is that their latest administrative fad is to hire a CMO. A what? A Chief Marketing Officer. This is Jim Hightower saying the good news is that students overwhelmingly prefer light to marketing. More than 50,000 outraged students signed an online petition forcing UC officials to withdraw the logo.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. United Steelworkers President Leo Gerard says a study by the National Bureau of Economic Research shows employment in U.S. manufacturing is nearly 30% lower than it otherwise would have been due to China's admission to the World Trade Organization in 2001. Gerard says the study reinforces much of what the USW has been saying about the decline of manufacturing and the tremendous loss of American jobs due to U.S. trade policies. Gerard says this job loss reality illustrates the necessity for President Obama to get much more aggressive in enforcing trade regulations to stop China's continued trade violations. Gerard says future trade agreements must ensure that workers and American manufacturers share in the benefits of free trade. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka is urging the American people to keep up the momentum of pressure on Congress to stand up to what he calls Republican bullies. Trumka says that the GOP is once again trying to hold America hostage to force cuts in popular and successful programs like Social Security and Medicare. Trumka says Republicans will threaten to let the U.S. default on its debt in order to force what the AFL-CIO says are dangerous austerity budget cuts. Trumka says other simple reforms can address the nation's deficit and debt problems without slashing working family programs. He says it's time for Congress to offer serious solutions by investing in infrastructure and education, reducing economic inequality, and increasing economic security for America's working people. A UN report shines a light into homes around the world and on the secret lives of domestic workers. Jesse Russell reports.
Domestic workers continue to be one of the fastest growing segments of workers, but also one of the most likely to be lacking basic labor rights. A report issued Wednesday by the UN's International Labor Organization said nearly 63 million people worldwide are employed as domestic workers, and that's a 60% increase over 15 years. The majority of domestic workers, 83%, are women, and they make up 7.5% of all working women worldwide. Not included in the report are the estimated 7.4 million child domestic workers who are under the age of 15. As many as 90% of domestic workers lack basic protections that are typically provided to other workers, while 30% have no coverage whatsoever under labor laws in their countries. Domestic workers often have limited language proficiency in the countries they work, and often limited knowledge of local laws. Seeing as domestic workers tend to work in the home, they're also isolated from other workers and are vulnerable to exploitation.
This newscast made possible in part through underwriting support from the National Association of Letter Carriers and from the IBEW. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. I feel like I'm choking. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
You know how to react to their asthma attacks. Here's how to prevent them. Call 1-866-NO-ATTACKS. Visit www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA and the Ad Council.
This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you wherever you're listening. We Act Radio, 1480 AM, WPWC in Washington, D.C., or perhaps SoFlo Radio, Progressive Blend, or maybe you're checking out the podcast. Thank you, by the way. It's free. We appreciate you downloading it and subscribing to that and to YouTube. So we were talking with Mitch Malasky just a little while ago about NFL players and the onset of CTE, which is a result of repeated brain injury. And it brings to mind the overall concern, which is healthcare. And in fact, the National Research Council has found that the United States pretty much sucks at healthcare.
Is that the clinical term they use there?
I'm going to just put in my own term.
Ah, okay.
Yes. The Institute of Medicine and the National Research Council, the NRC, convened a panel of experts to investigate why the United States is lagging behind in healthcare. They did an 18-month review of the United States and 16 peer countries: Australia, Austria, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. So pretty much the main developed nations in the world. And they find that in most categories, the United States is dead last in the quality of our health care. In fact, the average lifespan of Americans is much shorter than those in other countries. For instance, 5.2 years shorter for men than men in Switzerland. And as of 2011, 27 countries in the world had higher life expectancies at birth. So despite being, quote unquote, the richest nation on earth, and as so many people have you believe that has the greatest health care on earth, the United States pretty much sucks. The report outlines 9 health areas where the United States lags behind other rich nations: infant mortality, homicides, teen pregnancies, drug-related deaths, obesity, disabilities, AIDS prevention, heart disease, and just overall children reaching their 5th birthday. We lag behind in all of those areas. And the main problem for this that they discovered was access to health care. That compared with other countries, Americans are more likely to find care inaccessible or unaffordable. But that's the problem. Americans can't get to, quote unquote, that best health care system in the world. They don't have access to it. But in this country, things are about to change. And some of those changes are starting to take place this year, with the large majority of them taking place next year. But some of the ones that will impact this country's ability to care for its sick are finally taking place, including obviously measures that have been implemented in 2012 and before. But one of the big ones taking effect in 2013 is preventative health care services. The federal government is now going to be spending more money in state Medicaid payments to offer preventative services for free or at very little cost. They have already mandated that private insurance companies must offer these services for free.
Now, is this Medicaid expansion, is this one of those ones where the governors have to say, yes, we'll take the money? So one of those things where you can have a Bobby Jindal or a Rick Scott say, no, we don't want that, therefore it doesn't. Or are they required to, whether they take the money or not?
I believe they're required to,
Cool.
whether they take the money or not. It's just that what you're referring to is whether they expand Medicaid to include those making up to 200% of the poverty level.
Oh, got it.
So essentially about $40,000 for a family of four.
Right.
Yeah. The new tests that they're implementing will include high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, cancer screenings, counseling to help people lose weight, quit smoking, reduce alcohol use, routine vaccinations, flu and pneumonia shots, and many others. Now, you hear that list, and you can't help but be surprised that these services weren't already available for free or at little cost. But these very basic life-saving measures, apparently...
It's not even a matter... Yes, free. It's not free. And also, Medicaid is an insurance policy. It's an insurance policy provided by the state to people who have low income. So you say to yourself, why wouldn't that be covered under an insurance policy?
Right.
It should be, because it prevents the greater costs down the line.
Well, they are, but a lot of them, they've been covered for the most part.
But by Medicaid insurance policies.
Right, but they required a copay.
I understand.
They required somebody to pay money out of pocket.
And therefore, if you're a very low-income person, what are you going to spend your money on? Are you going to spend it on food for your kids or the copay to see if they're at risk for diabetes?
And being that poverty, the quote-unquote poverty line, hasn't kept up with real cost of living for quite some time, you can be quite far above that and still not afford to pay your copay.
Sure.
You still may be in that situation of saying, do I buy groceries or do I go to the doctor? And so, that's why people end up treating serious conditions as opposed to preventing them in the first place. But now, thanks to Obamacare, those situations will be free. And this is a big one, because what is one of the number one arguments we're hearing out of the right is that Obamacare will limit choice by reducing payments to providers, right? We've heard that over and over and over again, that effectively providers, doctors, hospitals will refuse to see Medicare and Medicaid patients because they're not making enough money, which, first of all, in most states, if you're a decent-sized provider, whether that be a chain of doctors, a hospital, you're not going to have that option. You're not going to be able to cut out that large of your market. And guess what? Those people are going to come there anyway. So either you could get the contracted rate that's agreed upon with Medicare, or, hey, don't get paid. We don't care. We can use that money for other health services. But in response to those making that argument, guess what? Starting January 1st, Medicaid payments in every state were increased. Medicaid payments to doctors were increased to be brought up to the same level as Medicare. Most people may not realize Medicare pays a reasonably small portion of a bill. They pay a contracted rate based on the fee that's the service that's provided or the type of institution that's providing care. Medicaid pays even less. A rough average would be about 10 to 13% of what the actual billed amount of the service is.
I have a question about this.
Sure.
This billed amount versus percentage of what they pay. The billed amount would be the point of service amount.
Yes.
Are those artificially inflated?
Absolutely.
So therefore they can say, because very few people, other than the Rush Limbaughs of the world who have heart attacks and go into Hawaiian hospitals, who pay cash, most people pay it through the contract price. So if the contract says we'll pay X percent and they want to sway public opinion, can't they make those artificially high and therefore say, you're only paying us 13%?
They certainly can, but I'm
not saying there's many hospitals, especially rural hospitals, having financial troubles.
Well, there's a lot of nuance here because there's a lot.
You know about these
there's different ways that, for instance, Medicaid pays. Medicaid would either pay based on line item, like every line item on a hospital bill is typically broken out by department, like you have your pharmacy line item, et cetera. Either they pay a certain amount per that line, or they pay a percent of charges in typically, as you just mentioned, in rural areas, which is a sole community provider, meaning there's only one hospital in so much of a radius that has to serve the people, so therefore Medicaid can't cut their rate so much, and in which case They actually get a reasonable
when you say
percentage
that,
of charges.
when you're saying that it's 13% of,
That's
that
the bill
of number,
charges.
where do they get that of number?
Well, it's
Do they pull it out of their butt? Is what because I'm wondering if they just pull that out of their butt.
It's a multitude of factors. Typically, they have a percent, like a markup, just like any other.
Right.
Yeah.
Can they say this shirt has this name on it, so we're going to charge 300% of retail because everyone's willing to pay that, or not? And then say, but now we're going to make it 50% off. And everyone's like, yay, it's a sale. But it's not really a sale because they marked it up 3 times and took it down by half.
There is some of that going on, but it is a little more closely monitored because they have to get approval, usually from state medical boards, in order to increase their charges that much, unless they're a private hospital.
But if they're already ridiculously inflated, then it's just about a movement from that peg point. How is that peg point set? I'm not saying you have the answer.
Yeah,
I'm just
no,
wondering.
there's so many factors we couldn't get into it in this segment. But they've also increased a pilot program to test out bundling services. This is another thing taking place in Obamacare in 2013.
Healthcare by Vios.
Well,
Bundling?
Yes. This is essentially trying to encourage doctors to coordinate patient care so that you don't have one doctor, for instance, a cancer patient. You don't have one doctor providing chemo, one providing care from chemo, one providing radiation.
And the balkanization.
They actually work together.
And share so there's not duplicative.
Yes. So there are some negative, at least what I would consider negative impacts of what's occurring in 2013. A medical device tax. So pacemakers, defibrillators, artificial joints, hearing aids, stuff like that will actually have a 2.3% tax on them. That concerns me.
Yeah. Also hover-rounds, little oxygen things, the things you see on television. I think they're targeting that as well. Is there a sales tax already on these items?
I don't know.
So we should find that out, because if it's your sales tax is usually 7%, it's only a 2-point-some%. I don't have an issue with it.
Well, and there's some here that you're going to hear the right try and argue as, things that are going to affect the middle class. However, I don't really think they're going to affect the real middle class very much, which is basically almost a 1% tax increase, Medicare tax increase for incomes in excess of $200,000. So if they say you're going to pay more in FICA taxes, well, unless you make more than $200,000, no, you won't. Medical deductions. People who are able to itemize medical expenses in their taxes used to be required to be 7.5% of their income. Now they'll have to be 10% or more in order to be deductible. Most people don't qualify for those deductions. They just think
and
they
those
do.
who do really need it.
Right. Caps on FSAs, flexible spending accounts, or healthcare savings accounts used to have a tax-free you could put $5,000 into a tax-free healthcare savings account per year and use that money on healthcare-related expenses. It's now been limited to $2,500. If anybody's had one of these healthcare savings accounts,
they suck.
They suck. And most people can't afford to stash $5,000 away in the event they need it for healthcare services. So this really is going to affect anybody who can hang on to $5,000 and not need it right away. And basically just spelling out more healthcare benefits. So helping you to understand what your insurance companies do, what they're supposed to do.
For everyone, you hear, especially in November and December of each year, those ads for enrollment in Medicare Part D. You're going to hear new ads in terms of enrollment in the new healthcare exchanges.
Yes, and your W-2s, starting for the wages in 2012, will now show a form, a benefit, that how much money employees actually receive from employer-sponsored health cares. This is to help you understand how much your employer is actually contributing to the health care costs. And it may have something to do with making sure employers actually contribute and or face the fine. So this is all interesting news, especially as the chat room just pointed out. Rick Scott gets caught lying, saying Medicare costs are 2,500 times more expensive than they actually are. So lots of stuff to watch in healthcare news in 2013.
1 billion, 250 billion,
it's all the same. It's relative. But we're going to be right back with some big news. Could we be actually seeing the end of the war in Afghanistan soon? I don't know. We'll talk about that and more when we come back right here on Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Stick around.
Doctor, doctor, give me the news. A hot summer night, feel like a net.
It's our last errand today, Jimmy. Just need to pick up some light bulbs.
Whoa, there's so many. Did Grandma tell you which ones to buy?
No, but check out the label on this package. It'll help us find the right bulbs.
Does it really matter?
Well, sure. The new light bulbs use a lot less energy, so we save money on our electric bill by using an energy-saving incandescent, CFL, or LED.
How about this bulb?
Let's see. We need to replace the 60-watt bulbs in our bedside lamps. That one is 800 lumens, so it should do the trick.
I've never heard of lumens.
Lumens tell us how bright the light is. The more lumens, the brighter the bulb.
You know, Grandpa, you're a pretty bright guy.
Yeah, you're pretty smart yourself, Jimmy.
Lumens, the new way to shop for light. Learn more at EnergySavers.gov. That's EnergySavers.gov. A message from the U.S. Department of Energy.
You may be hearing about people having trouble making mortgage payments and risking losing their homes. Many of them just aren't aware of the options that can prevent foreclosure. There are many options available to homeowners, such as repayment and forbearance plans, loan modifications, and even refinancing. Where does someone go for help? They should talk directly with their lender or a qualified HUD-approved counseling agency. Both can provide helpful information without charging a fee. According to PMI Mortgage Insurance Company, it's not a good idea to pay for services that you can get for free from a lender or a qualified nonprofit counseling agency. To learn more, visit homesafepmi.com or call HUD at 1-800-569-4287 for a counseling agency near you. That's 1-800-569-4287. This message is brought to you by PMI, supporting sustainable home ownership that strengthens communities.
Friends, David Schuster here, and all of us at We Act Radio are so proud of our neighbors here in Southeast D.C., especially one of our partners, the Ark. The Ark is at 1901 Mississippi Avenue Southeast. It's the home to some of Washington's best, including the Washington Ballet, the Levine School of Music, Boys and Girls Club, and the Children's Health Project. All provide a number of programs and services within the very same facility. The Ark is also home to the Ark Theater, the only theater east of the river, which hosts a variety of dance, music, and theatrical shows each year. Almost everything you could want is at the Ark, so stop by and see them. The Ark, 1901 Mississippi Avenue in Southeast. For more information, visit the Ark's website, www.thearkdc.org, or call 202-889-5901. The Ark, part of Southeast D.C.
This is Stephanie Miller.
Hi, this is Tom Harmon.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Schuster of Take Action News.
I'm Brad Friedman of BradBlog.com.
Hi, I'm cartoonist and agent provocateur P.S. Mueller.
This is Nicole Bell of CrooksandLiars.com, and this is...
You're listening to
and watching
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Great presidents aren't born, they are made. We've got to push people. They don't jump out in front of a parade if there's not a parade there. That is political suicide. The parade, metaphorically, already has to be in the streets with the picket signs saying, we need progressive talk in Portland, or we need marriage equality in Washington, or we need marijuana legalization in Colorado, you know, whatever.
Trans-Canada Pipeline.
Stop
the pipeline.
We have to push for our positions because they're not just going to out of thin air.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
Yeah. What? Absolutely nothing. Yeah. What? Absolutely nothing. Say it again.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. I want to tell you about Sergeant Whitman. Who is Sergeant Whitman? Have you heard his name recently? Well, perhaps if you live in Chester, Virginia, you happen to be a family member there, you may have recently learned that Sergeant Aaron Whitman was recently killed in combat in Afghanistan. He died from injuries sustained when his unit was attacked by small arms fire while on mounted patrol. He was assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 69th Armor Regiment, 1st Brigade Combat Team, 3rd Infantry Division from Fort Stewart, Georgia. And Sergeant Aaron Whitman, like the 310 U.S. soldiers we lost in 2012 and the 2,175 servicemen and women we lost since the Afghan war began, wasn't heard on any news station, wasn't talked about in any press, because people don't want to see the coffins coming back. It's easier to let the war go on if we pretend it isn't happening. So far, Allied troops have lost 3,256 men and women since 2001 when the Afghan war began. 405 in 2012 alone. Sergeant Aaron Whitman was the first casualty we've had in 2013. He died January 10th, and we send our prayers and appreciation to his family. But the question remains, why are we still there? What are we fighting for, and what does winning constitute? And some big news this week that we're going to get into is that we may withdraw all troops in 2014. Well, I would imagine if you ask Sergeant Aaron Whitman's family, or the 310 soldiers' families of those lost in Afghanistan in 2012, or the 2,175 families that lost family members since the war began, I don't think they need a reason. I don't think we need a reason. We're going to get into that and so much more coming up in the next segment. You are listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you, Sergeant Whitman. Our thoughts go out to you. We'll be right back here on Talking Left. Stick around.
Looking back at 2012, who was the nuttiest political fruitcake of all? Donnie Trump, Rick Santorum, and Newt Gingrich instantly come to mind, but they're pros at the nutball game, so naming them is unfair to some of the amateur talent that burst on the scene at year's end. For example, Wayne the Insane LaPierre. This honcho of the NRA came completely unwrapped during a December press conference. In a tremulous voice, the gun industry lobbyist delivered a rambling 25-minute tirade. He assailed anyone who suggests that the sickening assault weapon slaughter of 6-year-old school kids in Connecticut should prompt us to ban those senseless weapons of mass killing. Rather, ranted LaPierre, the answer is more guns, turning American schools into armed fortresses. If that's crazy, Wayne concluded, then call me crazy. Yet, even Crazy Wayne wasn't 2012's top nut, for he was nipped at the last moment by a 7-man pod of nuts known as the Iowa Supreme Court. On December 21, this all-male court voted 7-0 to decree that, get ready to be whopper-jawed, a male boss may legally fire a female employee for no reason except that he finds her sexually irresistible. Try to get your mind around that. Even though she was not flirtatious, had no interest in him, and had been a stellar worker, she was ruled to be at fault, because the boss man can't control his lust. The learned men of the bench insisted that she was not fired because of her gender, but because of his feelings. So it was not discrimination, but merely an act by the boss to save his marriage. Another victory for family values. This is Jim Hightower saying, never mind that he was saving his marriage from himself, not from her. They say that justice is blind, but in Iowa, it's just plain nutty. For their supreme spasm of sublime nuttiness, we award 7 fruitcakes to the Iowa court.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. California Teachers Association President Dean Vogel reacted to the shooting at Taft High School Thursday by saying the California teachers have serious concerns about the increased number of school shootings in America. Vogel said the teachers' thoughts and best wishes for a speedy recovery go out to the student injured in that shooting. The California Teachers Association also commends the teacher and campus supervisor for their quick responses as they put themselves in harm's way to protect students. The CTA says this latest shooting reiterates the need for communities to come together to ensure we have safe learning environments for all students. Some UAW workers unhappy with deteriorating working conditions at the Detroit 3 will be demonstrating across from the Detroit Auto Show over the weekend and Monday. Auto Worker Caravan will be doing the protest. They say that the global restructuring of the Detroit 3 automakers has been on the backs of working people to maximize profits. When 2 of the Detroit 3 were rescued by the federal government, the restructuring meant that auto workers lost their annual cost of living adjustments, lost some break and holiday time, suffered a drop in overtime pay, while also allowing the companies to pay new hires lower wages. The Auto Worker Caravan workers say the American companies are adopting a Mexican maquiladora model for U.S. auto workers. The workers say that means using more temporary workers paid as little as $9 an hour, increasing the pace of assembly work, imposing alternative work schedules and flexible operating patterns that force workers into 10-hour-plus shifts, and being harassed by management when injured on the job. The workers are calling for a further restructuring of the U.S. auto industry to improve the deteriorating working conditions for auto workers while building much-needed clean, green vehicles and mass transit to meet national needs while creating good jobs. Organized labor leaders are praising the work of Labor Secretary Hilda Solis, who is resigning soon. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says that Secretary Solis, quote, brought urgently needed change to the Department of Labor, putting the U.S. government firmly on the side of working families, end quote. He said Solis never lost sight of her working-class roots and always put the values of working families at the center of everything she did. Teamsters President Jim Hoffa said Secretary Solis has been a strong advocate for working families throughout her public career, and as the daughter of a Teamsters shop steward, she learned early in life the value of a strong labor movement. Hoffa says she will be missed. This newscast made possible in part through underwriting support from the National Association of Letter Carriers, the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and by OPEIU, the Office and Professional Employees International Union. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It takes 12 years to create a graduate. It takes about the same time to create a dropout. And at the end of the day, the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be you. So United Way is asking you to make a pledge. Tutor a child who needs help. Mentor a kid who needs someone on their side. Volunteer to read to children. Because when a child advances, we all advance. Be a reader, tutor or mentor, give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge now at liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. President Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan met with the Obama administration this week. And on the eve of that visit, the Obama administration said that it was open to the so-called zero option.
It's been named that. It was Martha Raddatz, I believe, who asked the question.
Yes.
On a conference call. And they said that that was one of the options that they were looking at, thus named Zero Option.
Yes, it essentially would involve leaving no troops in Afghanistan after 2014. And that is something rare because in many of the countries we have had a military presence in, we still remain, including wars fought decades ago. One exception there is Iraq, which we don't have any troops there because you're shaking.
Well, we still have troops there.
Well,
that's what I'm wondering if that isn't going to happen. We don't have troops there, but we have troops there.
Well, but we don't have a real military presence in Iraq.
But now, when you say 2014, you mean they're gone by 2014. They're going to start this in the spring.
Yes.
We're talking a couple months. We're talking March.
Yeah, the comments came after Obama wrapped up talks with Afghan President Hamid Karzai, promising to speed up a transfer of security responsibility to Afghan forces by the spring, in a sign that the U.S. troop withdrawal could quicken. There are certainly questions about whether the Afghan forces are capable and up to par for this task. But regardless, Obama said NATO forces, including the U.S., would have a very limited role in the country after 2014. And he would begin planning the withdrawal of most of the 66,000 U.S. troops left in Afghanistan, and said afterwards they would have a very limited mission, specifically just training. And by the end of next year, that America's war in Afghanistan would finally be over. This is, I think, good news for the country. Certainly good news for the 66,000 troops we still have deployed there. It's good news for their families. And it's good news regarding how much money we're continuing to spend in that country. Since 2001, the United States has appropriated more than $90 billion with a B for just the Afghanistan reconstruction. That assistance is essentially $28 million a day, more than the U.S. has spent on any nation since World War II. $28 million a day. Just think of all the nation building we could be doing here at home with $28 million a day. Now, there is speculation that Karzai is refusing to give American soldiers immunity for events that take place there after the withdrawal deadline, and that is a factor in getting the troops out of the country sooner. There's also speculation about corruption in the Karzai administration, leading to somewhat rocky relations between him and President Barack Obama. But the overall opinion in polls of the United States public is that we want America's longest war to end, and we want 66,000 combat troops that remain there home safely. We would likely keep a few thousand troops there to continue to train Afghans and take part in operations against al-Qaeda. But the United States has also left the option open of none. Zero. You're on your own. Could it be that they finally realized Afghanistan is an unwinnable war? Could it be that they've finally realized al-Qaeda is operating in Pakistan, not Afghanistan? Hopefully they don't just go and start another war there. But the question is, what allows us to get our troops home? If the administration, if the country needs to, quote unquote, declare victory, say that it was a success and that democracy is now alive and well in Afghanistan, so be it, according to me. If we need to allow the administration to call this a win to get our troops home, a win for America, a win for Afghanistan, I don't particularly care. I won't argue about the lack of trained Afghan troops. I won't remind them of the billions of dollars wasted, lost, stolen. I won't accuse the administration of surrendering for sure. But the next time they want to start a needless war, the next time they want to send our men and women into harm's way for what appears to most of us to simply be access to oil, when they want to waste millions and billions and trillions of dollars on the military-industrial complex and pay off their buddies like Halliburton, that's when it's time for us to remember these facts, to remind them of statistics like the number 2,175, which is the number of soldiers, number of men and women we have lost in Afghanistan since 2001. Almost as many as the lives that were taken for the event that started this whole war, regardless of the fact that you can't win a war on terror, just like you can't win a war on drugs. You can't fight an ideology.
And since the two big wars are now coming to an end, and by the way, I did look it up. You are right. I figured that they would just kind of leave a couple thousand here or there. U.S. troops out. They have 180,000, contractors still there, but they have no U.S. Army protection, anything like that. They're on their own. So there are no U.S. troops in Iraq. So when they bring everything home from Afghanistan, you're going to have the military-industrial complex wanting a new war. Yep. And it takes a few months to gin that up. And we know, we've watched it so many times, how they do it, how they did it with Iraq, how they did this, how the Koch brothers do the Social Security battle. They start with their little Cato Institute in next door, the Heritage Foundation, writing their papers and finding their crazy butt statistics. And then they put the people on the TV. They're going to do this with Iran. It's going to take about 9 months, but they're writing the papers now. They've been kind of percolating on the back burner, but it's going to come on the front burner. Watch for it. It's not just going to be the politicians who are the warmongers. You're going to have experts going out there saying how Iran is this imminent threat to the United States of America and our ally, but it's going to become a fevered pitch, and then the right-wing pundits will pick it all up. And any Republican who wants to run for election in the next election cycle, all this will be in place by the time they need money.
Yes.
This fall. So they're going to want that.
Yep. We're going to see the discussion change from, is Iran a threat? Is Iran building a nuclear weapon? To what's going to be done about Iran? When are we going to do something about Iran?
Right.
That, and I have to wonder, will President Obama, slow down the drone war? I doubt it. I imagine we'll still be waging war in Afghanistan. We'll just be doing it by video game console.
From Pakistan.
Yes.
They love that there, too.
Yeah. It's just, I don't care if they need to, quote-unquote, save face and call it a victory. That's fine with me, as long as it brings our troops home. The only time that becomes a problem for me is, as you said, Shane, in 9 months when they want to start the next war. That's when all of us need to be out there with our statistics, with our protest signs, with our reminders, with our signs that say there was no WMDs in Iraq, and on and on and on. But up until then, let them say it's a victory. I don't care. If it brings our beloved men and women home to safety, to their families, to be cared for and appreciated and respected as they deserve to be, that's fine. So be it. Yay for America, go victory, woohoo. I'll be your first cheerleader. But not when you want to wage another war.
But the victory parades will soon turn into protest parades the next time you want to do this.
Yep, absolutely. And,
Which brings us to Chuck Hagel.
Yes. What do you think is going to happen with Chuck Hagel? Do you
I think
he's going to get
confirmed.
nominated?
He has been nominated.
Approved?
I think he will be confirmed. I think it's going to be raucous. But Chuck Hagel, I know he has his detractors on both sides, but he just, no matter what letters after his name, he seems to project those same ideas that President Obama does, and that's who he wants in there. He wants an advisor who has served honorably in the military, knows what military families go through because he went through it. I'm not saying that the other ones have not. I'm just saying, and therefore, I will be interested to see the hearings. I don't know everything about the guy.
Well, I'm sure probably anybody who listens to this show listens to Rachel, and she did had a great show about Hagel and John Kerry and somebody else. I don't remember at the top. The other name's slipping my mind at the moment.
Shinseki?
Shinseki, all being Vietnam veterans. And there's a lot of speculation as to why all three veterans would be included in the administration in the cabinet. But the one thing that they all have in common, despite fighting and understanding the unwinnable war, is withdrawing from that war. They all saw the political fallout. They all saw the protests. They all saw what it took to get soldiers out of that country and what the country went through afterwards.
And the decades of shame on our country for how we treated those soldiers.
Right.
That will not, damn well, that will never be repeated.
I certainly hope not.
So.
But that was, kind of the underlying thought that crossed my mind is, did Obama select those particular people knowing he was going to withdraw from Afghanistan, knowing that he was going to withdraw, victory be damned, and people who knew how to help him clean up that mess?
Right. And would be reticent to start a new mess.
Because they had actually
experienced it. So you're going to have
it.
senators who are backed by that military-industrial complex going hard after Hagel.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see
Which is a large portion of senators and congresspeople on both sides of the aisle.
More on the Republicans.
More on the Republicans, but that war profiteering money.
Thus far, the people that have been the head of the Department of Defense have been against defense cuts.
Of course.
But we may have someone who's more responsive to that and actually cutting the budget in places we can, which would be partially the defense budget, and Hagel will be one of those. He's not going to stand in the way of that and raise holy hell, as our past two defense secretaries would.
Well, those returning soldiers are also going to need jobs, are also going to need assistance when they get back home, and some big infrastructure projects would be a great way to ensure that.
Yeah. Instead of putting them into schools.
Instead of spending money on defense budget, perhaps we can spend money actually rebuilding our nation here at home.
And helping out those who defend.
So, yeah, it's up to you how you want to view it. But I say, if it brings American troops home, go USA. We won. Now let's come home. So we're going to come right back with one last silly story just to put a smile on your face this Sunday morning. Did Donald Trump release his birth certificate?
The preeminent carnival barker is back.
We'll get into that when we come back.
It must be ratings time.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe he got a new hairpiece. We'll come back with that in just a few minutes. Don't go anywhere. This is Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we'll be right back.
And I just want to say, I think that was the most brilliant performance ever in the history of everything.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
We got no plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Fighter like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending. We got no plans.
This is your moment of clarity from LeeCamp.net. As most of you know, President Obama nominated John Brennan to head the CIA. John Brennan is a great guy, moderate arm wrestler, and loving dog sitter. A quick glance at his ChristianMingle.com profile will tell you that he enjoys long walks on the beach in Normandy, reading 50 Shades of Grey by the fire, and then, if there's time, torturing and bombing unarmed men and women. And if we Americans are too squeamish for a certain level of torture, Brennan also enjoys extraordinary rendition, which sounds nice, doesn't it? It sounds like, you know, I just saw Les Mis on the big screen, and I must say it was an extraordinary rendition of the singing and dancing that took place on the front lines of the Paris Uprising of 1832. Oh, Anne Hathaway deserves an Oscar nod, and Hugh Jackman deserves to suck on my... But no, extraordinary rendition is of course the practice of sending people we really want tortured to countries that don't mind violating human rights so much. But luckily we've been able to save money on a lot of flights because we're totally into human rights violation. We're down for all the indefinite detention and torture light fun you can muster. Hell, over 60 prisoners at Guantanamo have been approved for release by the courts years ago, and we don't release them anyway. We don't give a f***. What are they going to do? Call their lawyer? Can't breathe. Unless you think Brennan only violates the rights of people without white skin. No. He's the #1 fan of warrantless wiretapping on American citizens. On every unconstitutional wiretapping day, he shows up at the office shirtless with wire painted on his face and tap that ass painted across his chest. He then sits there in the wiretap room going, "Yeah! Yeah!" Oh, and I can't forget to mention drone attacks. Brennan doesn't just cheer for drone attacks. He does their PR for them, often lying and saying no civilians have been killed. Thanks to John Brennan, George Bush, Barack Obama, and many others, we didn't just cede the moral high ground. We dug a little hole in the top of it and then carefully dipped our in. That's right. We teabagged the moral high ground. I hope the history books don't forget that part when they tell the kiddies about it. No, I hope there's a graphic diagram. That's been your moment of clarity from LeeCamp.net. Join me at LeeCamp on Twitter and Facebook.com/LeeCampComedian. We have a blast over there. You really should come on over. Oh my God, yeah, you would. Last time I was over there, I got an STD on my ear, on my ear.
No plans at all. Evil man's always transcending. Follow like sheep, swallow everything. Always simpletons or pretending.
I'm in the car next to you on the highway, heading to work. I sit in front of you on the bus. I work in the office down the hall and stand next to you in the elevator. We've known each other for years, and I've told you a lot about my life. But of all the things you know about me, here's one you don't. I'm 1 out of every 6 Americans, and I'm struggling with hunger. This isn't an incurable disease. It's not an uncontrollable epidemic. There's enough food in this country to feed every hungry person. This problem is closer than you think. Fortunately, so is the solution. Please, visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 7 meals for those around you, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we're Feeding America.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Yes, you got to love Lee Camp. Anybody who can work the words teabagging the moral high ground into a comedy bit just deserves an award there.
I played his there because I had 2 for today. I played one of them twice. I'm like, no, I got to put that other one back up.
Yes.
There. So normally wouldn't play one there on that break, but it had to be played.
Yes, it worked out well for what our topic was too, didn't it?
No doubt.
Yes, it was. LeeCamp.net.
Actually, I planned it that way.
Did you?
No.
LeeCamp.net. You can check those out and subscribe to the Moment of Clarity podcast. Obviously,
pick up his album,
for FCC reasons, we play the clean version. But for those of you listening at home,
if you're listening on SoFlo,
if you're listening on SoFlo, or if you're listening, somewhere where you're allowed to hear the curse words, the other ones are awesome. Just let me tell you, awesome.
Although I have to say that the imagination makes it amazing.
Yes,
especially when the bleep is like 3.5, 4 seconds, 5 seconds long.
Yes, because you can insert a lot of words.
It's like
there.
the scenes from Arrested Development.
Yes. Yes.
Go watch it if you don't know what I'm talking about.
I love Lee Camp. He is exceptionally nice and brilliant and a great activist, and we thank him for allowing us to play the Moment of Clarity podcast here on Talking Left. And I don't know if it's still available, but you could for a while download his first comedy album for free over at LeeCamp.net. It may still be available. So, yes, in Carnival Barker news, as promised before the break, Donald Trump, for anybody who didn't hear the story, Donald Trump offered $5 million to a charity of Obama's choice in order to for the president to release his college transcripts. This was after asking the president to release his birth certificate and creating and supporting this whole birther movement that Trump has...
And saying that the document that he produced during the election wasn't good enough. He wanted the long form, etc.
Right.
Which is important here in this
Exactly. Story. That's where I was getting. He specifically, when the president released his birth certificate, as many remember, the night before the White House Correspondents' Dinner, in which he mocked Trump gleefully and said, well done, sir.
Well handled.
Well handled, sir. Trump responded to Obama's releasing his certificate of live birth, stating that wasn't a real birth certificate. He wanted the long-form birth certificate and that the certificate of live birth didn't comply. Well, Bill Maher interjected himself into the mix.
You and Trump have some kind of beef going. What happened? It seems like you two should be good friends. I can't imagine what happened.
Why should we be good
I'm just teasing. Have you had him on your? You ever had him on your show?
Of course not.
No.
I mean, I asked for years, and he always lied and said, "Oh, I'll be there," and he never showed up. I'm glad he didn't, because you know he turned out to be such a first of all a terrible racist. So I don't feel bad about anything I say about him. He's the one who's been tweeting mean things about me.
Right.
And you know, look, I'm not looking for a feud with Donald Trump, and I certainly only wish the best for the syphilitic monkey who does his Twitter feed. But
a syphilitic monkey, which is even worse.
Well, the monkey thing, I think that's what got him so mad. Is because we did a new rule one week that supposed that perhaps Donald Trump had been the spawn of his mother having sex with an orangutan. Because, well, I didn't just make this up. The color of his hair.
Yeah.
It's worth listening to.
And the color of an orange orangutan is the only two things in nature of the same color. So
is that what this picture?
Oh, there you go. Jay,
I wonder what that was for today.
I'm not saying it's true.
Right.
I hope it's not true.
Right.
But unless he comes up with proof, I'm willing to offer $5 million to Donald Trump.
$5 million.
If he will come, that he can donate to a charity of his choice. Hair Club for Men, the Institute.
Yes. And in response, Donald Trump released his certificate of live birth.
Not the long form.
A long form birth certificate, and has asked that Bill Maher now pay him the $5 million.
The reason I wanted to play the whole thing is because Trump is now making a big deal out of it. He wants to sue him and all this stuff for making an offer that... It's no wonder that Donald Trump has such problems and goes through so many business bankruptcy. Bill Maher did not just offer him. He said he'd be willing to offer him. It's a really important distinction. And he said it twice, so I think he kind of knows.
Knew.
He never actually did offer, but it's hilarious. If you look at it, the document he produces, the one page, it says certificate of birth. And it says in the first line, just like Obama's original the form he put out, this is just to confirm the document we have on file in whatever borough of New York's hospital.
Right. But after all of Donald Trump's moaning and complaining that what President Obama didn't release, that Obama didn't release his long-form birth certificate, what does Trump do? The exact same thing.
And on top of it, wants to enforce an unenforceable contract.
Yeah, he's brilliant. I think he's actually only proving Bill Maher's...
I don't think he really wants the $5 million. He wants the publicity.
Exactly.
Here you go, Mr. Trump.
Is it time for another season of Apprentice to start or something?
Probably.
Yeah. Anyhow, we wanted to get into that today just to go ahead and laugh at him. Big shout out, happy birthday to Chris Lavoie. He'll be on with us next week in studio. Everybody go over and tweet him, Radio Guy Chris, and wish him a happy birthday. Big thank yous to, of course, Nicole Sandler, everybody at We Act Radio, Alex Lawson, Kimon Freeman, Pete Callahan, Daniel Marins, etc. There's just too many of you guys. You guys are all wonderful, and we love you. A big shout out to George Rodriguez of SoFlo Radio. You can check it out at SoFloRadio.com. Yes. Mike Hardiman for our amazing, amazing intro music. You can listen to his SoundCloud, Rocky Mountain Mike on SoundCloud, or you could check out his brilliant photography at Mike Hardiman talkingleft.com. All of those links are up every week on talkingleft.com with every show we do. Thank you to everybody who has downloaded or subscribed to the podcast on iTunes or the YouTube videos. We appreciate you, and please leave us some comments there and give us some feedback. We want to remind everybody that next week will be our pre-inauguration show, and we'll be hanging out in the studio with Chris Lavoie, the executive producer of the Stephanie Miller Show.
If you want to go over to Jim Ward Voices and bug him and tell him to get in here, too.
Yes, absolutely.
Seriously.
We would love to.
We're going to bug him Saturday night at Sexy Liberal in D.C., which is just a few blocks from here. Get there. If you're listening on WeAct, get some ticks.
If you haven't already, go over to sexyliberal.com. Get your tickets for Sexy Liberal. It's the January 19th at the Warner Theater. And coming up next, if you're listening on WeAct Radio, is Mike Levin. Check it out. We will be back next week. Hope everybody has a great Sunday. Go watch some football or politics, whatever it is you do. We'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for listening.